On a personal note, I would like to thank my late grandmother, who remains my guiding angel. Even in moments where it feels difficult, it feels giving up and surrender due to lacks and difficulty that comes with being attacked from within. It is my grandmother's guiding wisdom that kept me going. She is the one who named me a soldier. And as a result, I've become a soldier of the people. Her solid courage motivates me to remain committed to this movement and to the struggle for economic freedom in our lifetime.
I'm a king, yes.
I hold EFF, I hold Tata EFF, Tata. Tata EFF, Tata. Thank you very much. Let's settle down, fighters. The National Chairperson, members of the Central Command Team, leaders of the Provincial and Regional Command Teams, international guests, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, comrades from EFF structures across Africa, African continent, and in the diaspora, and all revolutionary delegates gathered here today. I stand here before you to extend heartfelt and revolutionary welcome to this historic third National People's Assembly of the Economic Emancipation Movement. We acknowledge with great appreciation the presence of delegates from our branches and regional and provincial command teams whose unwavering commitment to the revolution is the bedrock of our movement. To our comrades representing the Central Command Team, international guests and diplomatic corps, your solidarity inspires our collective struggle. We extend revolutionary greetings and express gratitude to all those who sent their well wishes but could not join us today. To those who have been able to join us, your presence reaffirms the solid power of the call for economic freedom in our lifetime. Comrades, I stand before you today to welcome you all to this great festival of the branches of the EFF, the Third National People's Assembly of the Economic Emancipation Movement. Fellow fighters, today marks the achievement, yet again, of what many thought would not be possible as we stand before you to mark the continued life of this organization of the working class. We stand here today as a generation that has inherited the struggle for liberation and declared for all to know that we are a generation of economic freedom in our lifetime. Comrade delegates, we stand here not representing ourselves, but our ancestors who bled so we can stand here today and continue the historic struggle for the land and the economy to return to the native people of Africa. We stand here resilient, fearless, and determined to attain the goals and objectives of the millions who have come before us, who died fighting against colonial domination and exploitation. Fighters and compatriots, our presence here is another act of defiance and a page in the history books of the revolution which should never be forgotten. We have earned our rightful place and stand on the shoulders of giants who demonstrated that no determined effort to break us will ever succeed, because we represent the wills and aspirations of liberation heroes who died for our freedom. We stand on the shoulders of the Khoi and the San people, King Hintsa, Chief Mangoma, King Tsukukuni, King Makado, and King Shaka Senga Kakona, who despite being armed with less sophisticated armaments, displayed conviction and fearlessness that gave them the strength and resolve to wage courageous wars of resistance. We stand on the shoulders of Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela, Robert Sobukwe, Steve Biko, Peter Mokaba, Chris Hani, Mama Gaddafi, Thomas Sankara, Amilcar Cabral, Queen Nzinga, and many African giants who, despite a system determined to break the spirit of our people, refuse to die and continue to live because of the ideas they represent. Fellow fighters, our presence here, after deliberate and coordinated efforts to destroy us, is another sign that the African spirit can never be broken. Delegates and the people of South Africa, the National People's Assembly of the EFF is the highest demonstration of democracy within the EFF and an exhibition of our commitment to being an organization that belongs to its own members. In the past 11 years, we have held a gathering of this nature, which constitutes itself as the highest decision-making body of our movement, on 2 occasions, having held the first National People's Assembly in Mangaung in the Free State in 2014, and the second National People's Assembly here in NASREC in 2019, Johannesburg. Since our inception, despite the negative caricature of the EFF as a movement characterized by dictatorship, we have remained committed to this internal democratic process without fail. The NPA is a political sitting defined by ideas that will shape not only the direction of our movement, but also the direction of the country, the continent, and the posture of the left on international affairs. The NPA is a gathering of delegates from the most basic and organic units of our movement, the branches, and it is here that we will reflect on the gains, losses, and future of our generation. The NPA will determine the political direction of the movement, receive reports, engage in discussion documents, and ultimately give a mandate to a new crop of leaders who will constitute the Central Command team for the next 5 years. Fellow fighters, all our National People's Assemblies have occurred at definitive moments in the history of South Africa. And after these sittings, the EFF has managed to dictate and determine the political discourse in our country. The first National People's Assembly occurred when the nation was reeling from the tragedy of the brutal massacre of the 34 lone mine workers in Marikana. And the former liberation movement had a firm electoral grip on our democracy, which gave them a sense of impunity, resulting in high levels of unchecked corruption. It was the formation of this movement, people's movement, that brought the Marikana massacre into the corridors of parliament and shook the former liberation movement to its core, disrupting the hegemony held over our political system. It was the first National People's Assembly that resolved that we will be the representative of the poorest of the poor, the dejected masses of our people, and that we will be found on the streets, in the picket lines, in the villages, on the farms, in the townships, in councils, in legislatures, and in parliament. It was at that first National People's Assembly that a weapon was given to the abused and forgotten masses of our people. A weapon for domestic workers, garden cleaners, petrol attendants, mine workers, hawkers, the millions of unemployed youth, and those in the corporate sector who suffer at the hands of racism on a daily basis. It was from that moment that the political terrain in South Africa was redefined and changed for the better. The years following the first National People's Assembly saw fear being struck in the hearts of racists and within the white supremacist and capitalist power structure itself, as a true revolutionary alternative had arrived to take the baton of centuries of struggle against colonialism. Fighters and people of South Africa, the Second National People's Assembly happened at a point when the white white capitalist establishment was cementing itself in South Africa, and as a result, it identified the EFF as enemy number one. This identification of our movement as an enemy resulted in a concerted campaign to destabilize the movement through smear campaign. We resolved at that assembly to solidify our posture as an anti-racist and anti-capitalist movement despite these challenges. At this third National People's Assembly, we are faced with a new moment wherein the EFF experienced its first electoral decline and suffered unprecedented levels of sabotage and infiltration. It is for this reason, delegates, that the theme for this NPA is defend, rebuild, and advance the struggle for economic freedom. Because for the first time, the revolution is under a genuine threat of disruption that risks delaying our freedom for generations to come. We have a duty to defend the gains of our emancipation movement and the ideas of the revolution from distortion and sabotage, because attempt to destroy the EFF will set the freedom of our people back for another 100 years. It is our duty to rebuild this economic emancipation and the faith our people have in the principle of economic freedom and justice, because the EFF remain the most potent and viable weapon for the liberation of African people. It is our revolutionary responsibility to advance the struggle for economic freedom in our lifetime, because our diagnosis that political freedom without economic freedom is meaningless remains true. And we as a collective and a movement remain the most reliable vehicle to carry the baton forward towards true liberation. It is this basic principle that must shape all our interaction at this third National People's Assembly. We must bear in mind at all material times that the fate of generation to come rests in our hands. Delegates and people of South Africa, inherently, the EFF is a movement rooted in ideology and tools of analysis that have shaped revolutions across history and continue to do so today. In the EFF, we purposefully subscribe to Marxism to analyze the class contradictions in society. Leninism as a guide to our perspective on state and the purpose of forming a leftist organization, and Fanonism to appropriately characterize the impact of colonial conquest and racism. Fighters, in order to know who we are, we must appreciate what we stand for and ask ourselves, what is Marxism? When we call ourselves Marxist, we must be able to explain it in the simplest term so that we can relate it to ordinary people in our communities. We have seen many self-proclaimed Marxists fail to break down this revolutionary ideology. Even in their mother tongue, they can't explain it. Yet they claim to understand the theory of Marxism. Those are not Marxists. They are petty bourgeoisies who are engaged in what we characterize in our organizational character and redesign discussion document as academicism. Academicism refers to the trend that separates the theoretical development from practical activity. This trend supposes that organization is less important than theory. To apply this Marxist method without focusing on the revolutionary socialist implications, to over-intellectualize Marxism by focusing on its academic application, which only relate to the few who have received an elite education and do not attempt to translate Marxism, Leninism to common language. Fighters, Marxism was developed in the mid-1800s by Karl Marx and his comrade Friedrich Engels, who together formulated the Communist Manifesto. Some of the other important works of Karl Marx and Engels are the 3 volumes of Das Kapital, which provide a critique of capitalism and the political economy. To understand Marxism, we must grasp 2 of its foundational principles, namely historical materialism and dialectical materialism. We must ask the question, what is materialism? Materialism, unlike idealism, is a philosophical principle that places the material world at the center of political and social reality. In other words, according to materialism, what we experience is informed by the material world around us, and all social and political changes are functions of our material reality and experience. However, without dialectics, the theory is incomplete. Dialectics, as developed by Hegel, can be understood as the union of the opposite. In dialectics, we see the thread of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. History, as we know it, can be explained through these tensions. In the first stage, its thesis is presented. The thesis is met with antithesis, which opposes the initial thesis. Ultimately, the thesis and antithesis reconcile, giving rise to the synthesis. Although this idea of dialectics was conceptualized by Hegel on the basis of idealism, for Marx and Engels, dialectics became a science of the laws of motions and the development of human society, nature, and thought. In other words, without the bourgeoisie, there is no proletariat. Without a master, there is no slave. And without the oppressor, there is no oppressed. Fighters, dialectical materialism covers three foundational laws and principles that must guide our scientific analysis as we engage in the struggle. The first is the unity and struggle of the opposite. The second is transformation of quantity into quality. And lastly, the negation of the negations. At the center of the unity and struggle of the opposite is the law of contradictions, which is the basic law of material dialectics. It states that everything has its own external and internal contradictions that determine its resolution. Fighters, the unity and struggle of the opposite helps us understand the nature of struggle and conflict between social groups, such as class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. All things in the universe exist in a constant state of change and development. Conflict, therefore, through the Marxist lens of dialectics, is not only negative, as it can be a necessary part of the process of revolutionary change and development. This law also helps us to understand that change is interconnected and that change in one aspect of our revolutionary struggle can lead to change in another aspect. We must therefore assert that the struggle we are engaged in and the conflict with the capitalist mode of production is necessary to bring about social development and change towards attainment of economic freedom in our lifetime. Fighters, the law of transformation of quantity into quality explains that revolutionary qualitative change is a product of gradual quantitative changes. In other words, to understand change, we must locate its foundation in the transformation of quantity into quality. In our context, our struggle, revolution, represent qualitative change. The contradiction in the capitalist mode of production represent quantitative differences as they gradually change either positively or negatively. But the net effect is a revolution, which constitutes a qualitative change. For example, the contradiction within our party can be resolved by method of criticism and self-criticism, whose net effect is qualitative. Meanwhile, the contradictions between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat is resolved through socialist revolution, which brings about fundamental change that through the lens of dialectical materialism is qualitative. Therefore, revolution is qualitative. Following on the laws of transformation of quality into quality, the final foundation principle of dialectical materialism is the negation of the negations. Fighters, this law can be simplified and understood as a new replacing and superseding the old. In chapter 32 of the first volume of Capital, Marx wrote, I quote, "The capitalist mode of appropriation, the result of capitalist mode of production, produces capitalist private property. This is the first negation of individual property as found in the labor of the proprietor. But capitalist production produces, with the certainty of law of nature, its own negation. It is the negation of negation. This does not re-establish private property for the producer, but gives him individual property based on the acquisition of the capitalist era. That is, on cooperation and the possession in common, the land and the means of production." Close quote. The first negations occurs when the old reaches its limit before the qualitative transformation occurs. Subsequently, the second negations occurs at the full realization of the new state. Be that as it may, in the Marxist sense, negation does not mean the complete destruction of the old state. Rather, in the process of transforming from one state to another, remnants of the old state remain in the new state. From slavery to feudalism, from feudalism to capitalism, and even in socialism, remnants of all three epochs remain, and this, Marx argued, will be overcome by the attainment of global communism. In simple terms, the negation of negations means the transformation of the old state into new state. Fighters, this is what Marxists, we argue that progress is not linear. It does not travel in a straight line. Progress travels in spirals. In the words of Lenin, I quote, "Human knowledge is not straight line, but a curve which endlessly approximates a series of circles, a spiral." Close quote. Our ideas, therefore, are always in a process of gradual changes which can build up into revolutionary qualitative change due to the contradictions within them. These fighters are the three laws which forms the basis of dialectical materialism. They are scientific and universal and must thus guide our reading of the prevailing conditions and our engaged in the struggle. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx argued, I quote, "The history of all up to this point existing society is the history of class struggle. Free men and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serfs, guild masters and journeymen, in a word, oppressor and oppressed." I close quote. In other words, fighters, Marxism characterize the engine of history and drive of social changes as the conflict between classes. The conflict between those who own the means of production and those who are forced to sell their labor to the owners of the means of production. The haves and the have-nots, the oppressor and the oppressed. In Marxism, class is defined by the relationship that a particular group share with the means of production. In the feudal era, which organized society under European royalty, a lord was a noble who owned land, and a serf was a peasant who worked the land in order to live on the land. The subsequent fall of European feudal societies and the rise of capitalism gave birth to the new but not so different contending classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, whose contradictions were also informed by the relationship they shared with the means of production. Much like the noble during the feudal era, the bourgeoisie owned and controlled the means of production, whilst the proletariat, like the serfs, sold its labor to the bourgeoisie. Driving expensive cars and wearing designer clothes does not make one a bourgeoisie. Living in Sandton, Camps Bay, Umhlanga, or any other affluent suburb in South Africa does not make one a bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie are those who own the banks that finances and control these expensive cars and houses you buy. They own factories where the material of your expensive clothes is mass produced. They own the land on which affluent estate and houses are built. They own the mines that exploit our mineral resources. The bourgeoisies own the farms, the forest, and ocean economy, and the banks, and the mines, and all other commanding heights of the economy. While we, the proletariat, we must sell our labor to them at a very exploitative rate to survive. Fighters, this is the most basic and fundamental cases made by the founding manifesto of the EFF and the 7 non-negotiable cardinal pillars. Economic power is the foundation of all organized life. Our relationship with the economy and the productive forces constitute the base, whilst all else, politics, religion, spirituality, art, and science constitute the superstructure which is informed and influenced by the base. Where will we worship our God, perform our customs and rituals, or advance politics, the arts and science, if we are alienated from the mineral resources of our land of birth? Even the basis of law arises out of the need to mediate the economic relations between the oppressed, the oppressor, and the oppressed. The economy is everything. This is why we must never separate the theoretical development of Marxism, which is our guiding tool of analysis, from practical activity. This must not be misrepresented to reject theoretical discourse and dialogue or seen as a call for mindless activism. Rather, our call for land reform, the nationalization of the banks and the mines, the ownership and control of all mineral resources and their local beneficiation must be located within the Marxist law of development of human history. Our primary enemy, therefore, remains monopoly capital, both locally and globally, which owns and controls the means of production. The motive forces that stand to benefit from the ultimate defeat of the bourgeoisie are the proletariat. The proletariat are the ordinary people of South Africa who remain landless, economically dominated, and excluded. Our fight for economic freedom in our lifetime must be located within the Marxist ideology of all history up to this point in existing society. Ours is a class struggle against capitalism, imperialism, and the alienation of our people from their mineral resources and wealth. The economy must be brought back into the hands of the people, and the victory of the poor and the working class who do not own the means of production against the elite and exploitative bourgeoisie class will sow the seeds of socialist state where all of us will share in the wealth and the riches of our land. Our government of the EFF will see the destruction of all classes and the creation of egalitarian society where all shall be free and equal and none will benefit at the expense of another. The understanding of classes is the cornerstone and foundation of understanding all Marxist theory and its application. If you have a full grasp of our class struggle, the historical development, and contemporary application, you will begin to appreciate Marxism as a tool of analysis and go on to explain it to our communities in their own languages. Comrades, President Vladimir Lenin, one of the ideological pillars of the very EFF we claim our membership to, in his writing, I quote, "Should we participate in bourgeois parliaments," I close quote, reflects on the importance of why we ought to participate in the electoral processes. Many amongst us forget why we participate in councils, legislatures, and parliament, and mistaken our participation as a means of personal achievement instead of it being part of a revolutionary task as leftist organization. There's no water. Cheers. In his paper, Lenin reflects on a question that was troubling leftists in both Germany and Russia in the 19th century regarding the relevance and the necessity of parliaments and where the vanguard party should locate itself with regard to participation and the national consciousness of the working class at the time. Open quote, parliamentarism is of course politically obsolete to the communists in Germany, but, and that is the whole point, we must not regard what is obsolete to us as something obsolete to a class, to the masses. Here again, we find that the lefts do not know how to reason, do not know how to act as the party of a class, as the party of the masses. You must not sink to the level of the masses, to the level of the backward strata of the class. That is incontestable. You must tell them the bitter truth. You are in duty bound to call their bourgeois, democratic, and parliamentary prejudices what they are, prejudices. But at the same time, you must soberly follow the actual state of the class consciousness and preparedness of the entire class, not only of its communist vanguard, and of all the working people, not only of the advanced elements. Participation in parliamentary election and in the struggle on the parliamentary platform is an obligatory on the party of the revolutionary proletariat, specifically for the purpose of educating the backward strata of its own class, and for the purpose of awakening and enlightening the underdeveloped, downtrodden, and ignorant rural masses. While you lack the strength to do away with bourgeois parliaments and every other type of reactionary institution, you must work within them, because it is there that you will still find workers who are misled by their priests, by the conditions of rural life. Otherwise, you risk turning into nothing but windbags, close quote. Lenin continues, noting in his reflection on the progression of the Russian Revolution in different periods, how the Bolsheviks tactfully located themselves within parliament to reduce it to absurdity, while simultaneously organizing Soviets for the overthrow of parliaments that were initially deemed a paragon of democratic practices. He says, open quote, there is a great usefulness during a revolution of a combination of mass action outside reactionary parliament with an opposition sympathetic, or better still directly supporting the revolution within, close quote. The mass action comes in the form of strikes in demands for various socio-economic changes that a bourgeois parliament simply cannot meet. While inside the very same parliament, there are legal parliamentarians who make the same demand. This is the most tactful way of forging a revolutionary program. The EFF exists in legislatures to fulfill the minimum revolutionary program, and the basis and a blueprint of our revolutionary program, which we must always pursue while in the legislatures, is the 7 non-negotiable cardinal pillars of the EFF. Expropriation of land without compensation for equal redistribution in use, nationalization of mines, banks, and other strategic sectors of the economy without compensation, building state and government capacity, which will lead to the abolishment of tenders, free quality education, healthcare, housing, and sanitation, massive protected industrial development to create millions of sustainable jobs, including the introduction of minimum wages to close the wage gap between the rich and the poor, massive investment in the development of the African economy, and advocating for a move from reconciliation to justice in the entire continent. Open, accountable, corrupt-free government and society without fear of victimization by the state agencies. We therefore, comrades, are in pursuit of state power, not for self-interest, but for revolutionary purpose, as described by the leader of the Great October Revolution of 1917, Lenin. Fellow fighters, the Third National People's Assembly is not a task we are undertaking for its own sake. It is an integral part of what constitutes a revolution premised on Leninism. It is Lenin who teaches us that revolutionary party constitutes constituted by revolutionary class and led by professional revolutionaries, must always be in the practice of democracy. It is Lenin who writes, I quote, "The whole party organization is now built on a democratic basis. This means that all the party members take part in the election of officials, committee members, and so forth. That all the party members discuss questions concerning the political campaigns of the proletariat, and that all the party members determine the line of tactics of the party organizations." Close quote. Fighters, Lenin also taught us that we must work tirelessly to ensure that the highest standing bodies are elected, accountable, and subject to recall. This, along with democratic centralism, which Lenin described as a freedom of discussion and unity in action, forms the fundamental building an organic vanguard and revolutionary party that will liberate the working class. There is often a temptation and some confusion, in some cases, misuse of the concept of democratic centralism. At times, some commissars and fighters and people outside our movement attempt to impose their personal preferences and decisions on lower structures under the pretense of democratic centralism. But as Lenin teaches us, true democratic centralism requires that the decisions are made through genuinely democratic processes characterized by robust participation, open debates, persuasion, and collective agreement. Only such decisions born from the democratic process can be considered legitimate under the principle of democratic centralism. Once a decision is democratically reached, all of us as members of the organization are bound to respect and uphold it as a collective mandate. We are not here at the Third National People's Assembly because we have no other task. We are here because ideologically we are obligated to do so. Internal democracy is sacrosanct, and without it, we are doomed to follow the path of fascism. There is no single individual who possesses so much revolutionary wisdom that they can assume leadership responsibility without a democratic mandate. We must defend the principle, fighters, without any doubt that we are ideologically correct. There is no genuine revolution that can be led outside of a revolutionary and socialist democracy, not bourgeois democracy, but people's democracy. If you doubt democracy because it has potential to be corrupted, then consider if a collective can be corrupted, what makes you think an individual cannot be corrupted? We must never surrender a people's organization to the whims of an individual. It is for this reason, comrades, that all issues we have proposed in the public domain are open for discussion, agreement, and disagreement here at this National People's Assembly. We have diagnosed that we need to establish sub-regional structures and possibly do away with regional structures so that our movement and its leaders emerge organically from where they reside and lead their own communities. I wish to make emphasis that I feel very strong about this point. It is part of our organizational experience that the regional structures in the EFF are not fit for purpose. This reflects an error in organizational design inherited from the former liberation movement, which we must now do away with. Additionally, we have proposed that we establish an EFF Youth Command and do away with the EFF Student Command so that we may appeal to all the youth of South Africa. The gift of democracy is that this NPA will resolve on this question, and no single individual has the right to impose their will on anyone. Compatriots, internal democracy does not mean weakness or the absence of decisive leadership, which we are often accused for. The West has a tendency to create the impression that one of the problems confronting the continent and liberation movement is that of authority. The notion is that the absence of authority leads to freedom and prosperity, and that all attempts at running communist and socialist states have failed primarily due to the so-called authoritarian character of their leadership. President Robert Mugabe, brother leader Muammar Gaddafi, Captain Thomas Sankara, Commandant Fidel Castro, President of the People's Republic of China, and the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, and President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, are all accused of being authoritarian, as though the West is governed by the most democratic of ideas. Put differently, it is as though democracy itself lacks authority. Authority refers to the imposition of the will of one sector of society onto another. In democracy, authority refers to the will of the majority prevailing over the few. Authority is ever present. For any system to function, there must be a command from superior to subordinate. To demonize authority within the revolution, within the context of our war against capitalism, is either ignorant or a deliberate attempt to sow confusion. What liberal thinkers fail to understand is the hypocritical critique of authority is that authority exists under all economic and political systems, even in capitalism thrives through authority. Capitalism survives because the state which currently exists to protect the interest of the capitalist class operates with the authority of the monopoly on violence. Authority refers to the system, hierarchy, and legitimacy conferred by the people or bought by money and state violence in the case of capitalism. As socialists, we are engaged in a war against the most perverse global economic system known to humankind. The absence of authority in our revolution is a guarantee of failure. The West wants us to lack authority so that we become chaotic and disorganized. We must never allow our enemies to define us. We must always subject ourselves to the authority of leadership, a leadership that draws its legitimacy from the masses, not to reactionary and liberal definition of democracy, which strip the revolution of its existence. As Marxists, we seek the authority of the poor and the working class who do not own the means of production, to surpass that of the bourgeoisie. Marxism teaches us that the working class must destroy the authority of capitalism, which thrives on private property, profit-driven economies, and the concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. In simple terms, as Marxists, we believe in the authority of the people over the means of production, not the authority of the bourgeoisie over the people and the economy. So, no one commissars and fighters has any ideological basis to call the EFF authoritarian. The very capitalist system we live under thrives through authority, and it is the authority of the few. We must expect an aggressive onslaught from captains of industry and their media puppets. We have seen this especially since we celebrated a decade of existence at FNB Stadium, where we united more than 120,000 people under one roof as a symbol of common purpose and unity we share as a movement. There will be attempts to discredit our achievement as non-existent and disruptive. This is because the agenda is to undermine that which capital does not control. Our duty is to expose this and be consistent in our message that the EFF remains the only incorruptible and uncaptured organization capable of delivering socialism in our lifetime. Chairs, fighters and compatriots, one of our defining ideological features is our commitment to the ideals of Frantz Fanon. There are two aspects of Fanon's work that we must re-emphasize, which must always guide us whenever we seek to understand our role in the post-colonial world. Two chapters of particular significance are from his book, The Wretched of the Earth, The Pitfalls of National Consciousness and on Violence. The chapters are significant because one provides guidance on why liberation movement fail post-liberation, and the other diagnoses the necessity of violence and the inherent violence existing in a colonial and neo-colonial society. If we want to learn from the mistake of those who came before us, Fanon is instructive. He tells us what not to do and what not to become. The problem we confront internally as Africans is the persistence of liberation movement that sustain themselves on blackmail and through the use of law enforcement agencies to suppress the people's demands for the promises of liberation. Most recently, the liberation movement here in South Africa, when faced with getting rid of itself, aligned with our historical enemies in characterizing the EFF as a threat to the nation, because when ideas are lost, blackmail and swartgevaar become the strategy. We are told that if the EFF is in government, it will be a doomsday for the people of South Africa. Fanon teaches and illustrates that liberation movements have no potential to lead us into the future. They are preoccupied with reminding our people of the past during every election cycle and periodically through meaningless celebration of so-called Independence Day. These movements are led by a class of triumphalist politicians who resent the masses and categorize them as ungrateful for the leadership of the liberation movement. The former liberation movement began to build a wall between itself and the masses while impatiently accumulating petty wealth in alliance with the West. Fanon's lessons are important because he shows us how post-liberation national leadership reconstitutes itself as a mediator of capitalist interests, turning the nation into a brothel for imperialists. Fanon reveals that this decay in the relationship between the people and the liberation movement create a political class that no longer relates to the people. This political class loses sight of the continued poverty of the masses and its inability to reconstruct society away from the grip of colonialism. Because of this, the former colonizer tightened its grip over the resources of the former colony through concessions, loans, and other mechanisms that entrenches our underdevelopment and dependency on the West. The national bourgeoisie, also underdeveloped to lead strategic sectors of the economy, turns back to the colonialist and relies on the protection and support of Europeans. Their failure led to the collapse of not only the nation, but also the liberation movement itself. This is what the EFF must always guard against as our presence increases in governance and places of political influence. We must not resent our people because they do not vote for us, even though we fight bitterly for their dignity. We must resist the temptation of crumbs of imperialism, crumbs imperialists leave for the political class, and never forget the genuine purpose of our struggle for liberation. We must avoid accumulating so much personal wealth that the hunger of our people for land, jobs, education, and decent life becomes nothing but slogans we chant to celebrate ourselves. Our reflection on more than a decade of selfless struggle for economic freedom in our lifetime must not become a parade of self-praise or a tool to immobilize our people. It must serve as an occasion to renew our passion and commitment to liberating our people. Fanon writes painfully, I quote, "After a few years, the breakup of the party becomes obvious, and any observer, even the most superficial, can notice that the party, today the skeleton of its former selves, only served to immobilize the people. The party, which during the battle had drawn itself the whole nation, is now falling apart. The party is becoming a means of private advancements. Close quote. We must hold Fanon's prophecy close to our hearts to ensure that the economic emancipation movement fulfills its strategic mission for economic freedom in our lifetime. Comrades, these are internal contradictions we must avoid to ensure that we do not betray the mandate of liberation. This is a self-reflective diagnosis that we must internalize as we enter a second decade of struggle, so we do not use our history of resistance or the external pressure of imperialism as an excuse to avoid accountability to the revolutionary expectations of our people or to interest self-interest and corruption. The second of Fanon's insight that we must hold close to our heart is his assertion that decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. This is critical for a militant organization like ours, because we are tasked with reawakening the consciousness of a society convinced of the possibility of reconciliation without justice. The EFF exists in a country indoctrinated to believe that the contradictions between the African black majority and the white capitalist ruling class can be resolved peacefully, and that violence in any form must be avoided and condemned. This belief is simply untrue. We must explain this truth to our people. When the South African Human Rights Commission takes us to court for saying that ultimately our revolution will require us to kill, we must be prepared to contextualize what we mean. When the Human Rights Commission and the racist lobby group take us to court for declaring that we are in a war with white supremacy, we must be able to explain to our people what black consciousness is and why it cannot coexist with the idea that white people are inherently superior and one of the two must die. Fanon is important here because he gives us the tools to explain to our people that the conditions within which they live are violent. It is violence to segregate African people into underdeveloped townships and villages without services. It is violence for a white minority to have complete control over the means of production in Africa. It is violence that the majority of the land remains in the hands of a white minority. Colonialism is institutional and structural violence, and reversing it requires violence. Changing legislation to allow for land expropriation without compensation is a form of organized violence against the white supremacy, but this violence is rooted in justice. Our message is simple. There cannot be unity and reconciliation in South Africa without justice, and justice will be violent for those who are comfortable at the expense of African people. Ultimately, there will be a need to take up arms, as this is the eventual outcome of all struggles against injustice met with resistance. This conclusion arises because the white capitalist class feels entitled to the wealth and resources they accumulated through crime and will violently defend their right to exploit and oppress African people. In the face of this arrogance, violence is inevitable. This is what we must coherently and logically explain to our people. Decolonization questions the colonial situation, casts into doubt, and makes the native an active participant in reshaping the world order. Decolonization is a substitution and radical reorganization of society wherein the last shall be first and the first shall be last. As Fanon tells us, this process demands that we prepare for violence at any stage because it is impossible to transform society born out of and sustained by violence without violence itself. Colonialism was born from the blood, suffering, slavery, destruction of Africans and African identity. Without the violent subjugation of Africans, the colonial system ceased to exist. Our people being denied education is violence. Our people living in shacks is violence. Our people working in mines for little wages while enriching global capitalists is violence. The erasure of our history is violence. The fact that labor such as domestic work, gardening and security services are reserved for Africans in service to white people is violence. The fact that a white child's first encounter with an African is often as a servant is violent. The entire existence of Africans is imagined through the eyes of the colonizer. And to radically change this and reimagine ourselves through our own eyes and tradition will be a violent process. Fanon's concepts of the two zones of reality, where the town of the European is filled with tarred roads and lies, while the lands of the native is filled with poverty and overcrowding, perfectly describes South Africa's violent social and economic situation today, which must be transformed. These are the realities we must explain to our people. We must show them how abnormal their situation is so that the prospects of violence does not offend them. Our people must never be offended by violence because their very existence is a manifestation of violence. Commissars and fighters, alongside internal contradictions, we must consider the external challenges that threaten the revolutionary project for African independence. These challenges are posed by imperialism and neocolonialism. Many liberal thinkers like to credit the failures and collapse of African states to the leadership style of African leaders, blaming socialist and anti-imperialist policies. Imperialist and so-called governance experts argue that African economies fail because independent states resist the anarchy of the markets, constantly calling for increased privatization as a solution to our economic problems. By anarchy of the markets, we mean the capitalist class and its proponents want democratically elected state to allow policy direction and economies to be dictated by invisible hand known as the independent market. This market downgrades and rates economies based on whether they are investor-friendly according to their narrow political, social, and economic preferences. The market manipulates prices and encourages collusion by the private sector to maximize profits regardless of the impact on ordinary people. This capitalist madness, which ignores the basic needs of the people, is a breeding ground for corruption. Resistant to this disorganized and undemocratic system through decisive state intervention and planned economy is dismissed as an authoritarianism. Imperialist nations propagate these arguments to mask their role in Africa's underdevelopment and to legitimize capitalist hegemony. They assume that the only valid form of governance is Western-oriented authority while attacking non-Western systems as inherently flawed. As Marxists, we must understand that our problems are from global capitalism and its advanced manifestation, imperialism. To dismantle this system, we must first understand Marxism, the concept of authority, and why global capitalism mobilizes itself against alternative ways of organizing the economy. Delegates, another question we must respond to and reflect on is the question of unity. Fighters, there has been a much debate and discussions across our nation about the cause of black unity and unity amongst the progressive forces. As part of the preparations for this Third National People's Assembly, we were questioned by our own branches as to what constitutes a progressive forces. We must have a coherent response to our own branches as to what continues to motivate certain alliances we have in society. But for the interest of defining a political our political moment, we must define what characterizes the progressive left in South Africa. To merely say you are progressive does not mean you are progressive. To merely state that you are on the left or that you are black conscious does not make you leftist or black conscious. To belong to these categories is proven through action, through ideological persuasion, through practice. Black unity and has always been imperative in South Africa, but blackness should not be used as a shield for opportunism or to escape one's own wrongdoing. The disparate need for black solidarity must not be taken advantage of by individuals who manipulate the black identity to avoid accounting for how they have jeopardized the cause of black liberation. There are forces in South Africa today who have discovered the cause of black unity after they previously undermined it while they were in power, and this discovery is manipulative. You as delegate must ask yourself, where was this black consciousness and black unity when the Marikana workers were killed? Whose blood nourished the birth of this economic emancipation movement, while the so-called new leaders of black unity were sitting as state president and even justified the killing of mine workers in Marikana, who were all, by the way, black. Did the need for black unity not exist when the youth of this country were shot, jailed and killed for demanding free education under the new messiah of black unity? When the EFF offered its 6% in parliament to amend the Constitution of South Africa to expropriate land without compensation, and this was rejected by the former liberation movement, where was the black unity then? Fighters, we must never allow black consciousness to be misused to con our people into forgetting, nor allow it to sanitize the legacy of failure and corruption. There are individuals who committed themselves to undermining the liberation of black people while in government and now, in an attempt to rescue their legacy of compromise and collaboration as head of state, director generals, CEOs of strategic state-owned enterprises. They reach for black consciousness as they approach their grave. When they were fresh, they didn't know black unity. Now they see the grave, they see black unity. It is our revolutionary responsibility to vehemently reject black unity born out of convenience and opportunism. To tell those who live lives of betrayal while they govern, that Steve Biko will not welcome them on the other side because they are non-white and agents of capital. Black consciousness is a political conviction that not only relies on the color of your skin, but also on your consciousness itself. You can be black, yet advance divisive politics of tribalism. You can be black, yet act as an agent of white supremacy and corruption. You may identify as black, but your character can still be defined by deception and dishonesty. You can be black and still sell out your brothers and sisters for a few pieces of silver. We, as the EFF, do not subscribe to unity based on skin color alone in our pursuit for liberation. We subscribe to a political unity defined by ideological conviction and honest politics, a unity that will bring about the defeat of our strategic enemy. Our enemy knows that it is the EFF that is the true liberation movement and not a pocket knife for individuals and self-gratification. In our history, we have never betrayed our people. As a result, we do not merely claim to be the home and inspiration of black people and black unity. We have earned this role. It is the flag and the logo of the EFF that strike fear into the hearts of the white capitalist establishment. This is because we have earned the fear of the enemy. For this, we must be proud. The EFF is not in a fight for its own survival, but because we already live in the hearts and minds of our people. We are now in a fight to defend the cause of liberation from losing legitimacy because criminals want to use ideology as a weapon of self-defense. If we allow the politics we subscribe to be delegitimized by criminals masquerading as messiahs of black unity, it will take decades of the left to regain credibility, and right-wingers and capitalists will rule us for centuries to come. Our triple task as a revolutionaries today, as we rebuild, defend, and advance the struggle for economic freedom, are to combat liberalism, revisionism, and opportunism. We must not allow opportunists to reverse history, nor ideology to die at the hands of liberalism while we live through the brutality and reactionary rule of those who preach black unity. Ideology must never be used as a tool to wipe away the practical failures of those who have led this country. We must defend Steve Biko, even in his grave, from being used by syndicates that serve individualism. Fighters, one thing we must be proud of as this National People's Assembly is that the majority of the delegate is women in this conference, which proves our commitment to allowing women to be at the center of political decision-making in the EFF. Out of 2,513 delegates, women delegates from their branches. Out of 2,513 delegates, 1,685 women are nominated as delegates from their branches, while 828 males were nominated. Fellow fighters, this organic representation of women in our conference is a sign that the narrative that the EFF does not appeal to women can no longer stand. 66% of delegates to this conference are women because the EFF is an organization that has begun to appeal to women, and these women form part of the highest decision-making body of the EFF in their majority. The EFF subscribed to the notion of Thomas Sankara, wherein he states that, I quote, "There is no true social revolution without the liberation of women. May my eyes never see and my feet never take me to a society where half the people are held in silence. I hear the roar of women's silence. I sense the rumble of their storm and feel the anger of their revolt." Close quote. Our nation is one where women live in permanent fear and silence, where women are murdered, undermined, and subjected to triple oppression, where they are oppressed because they are black, they are poor, and they are women. The participation of women, therefore, at this level, is not something to be taken lightly, because women must lead their own emancipation. We want to salute the branches of the EFF for not paying lip service to the women's struggle by electing them to determine the future of our movement and our nation. Comrade delegates, as part of holding ourselves accountable and tracing what we committed to do as this leadership elected at the Second National People's Assembly in 2019, we must reflect on the resolution made at the conference and account for what has been achieved. In instances where there have been resolutions that have not been implemented, we must stand here honestly and explain what the material challenges were. It is this NPA that must resolve on what is to be done to ensure that these ideas are achieved. Delegates to the Third National People's Assembly, part of the resolution on the land question on the Second National People's Assembly was that even though other political parties support the concept of land expropriation without compensation, they do so for completely different reasons, and reasons that may be against the ideals the EFF stands for. It was therefore resolved that the EFF must object to any amendment to the Constitution that will not result in the fundamental restructuring of the property rights regime in the country. Furthermore, the Second National People's Assembly resolved that the EFF must object to any amendment to the Constitution that will entrench the status quo and produce superficial changes. It was therefore on the basis of this resolution that we, as the EFF, after fearless participation in Parliament and numerous bilateral meetings with the former liberation movement, rejected the proposed amendment to Section 25 of the Constitution intended to entrench compensation for land expropriation and willing buyer, willing seller in the Constitution. We rejected this. This amendment was a distortion of the original EFF motion as it pertained to compensation and custodianship, as the former liberation movement remained committed to a failed restitution process that is premised on compensation and title deeds as opposed to state custodianship. Delegates, in terms of the resolution regarding broadcasting and the media terrain, the EFF second NPA resolved that there must be the immediate removal of Section 60, subsection 3 of the mass carry requirements altogether from the Electronic Communications Act. There should also be an amendment to the Electronic Communications Act in a way that allows the SABC to freely negotiate retransmission consents agreements on commercial terms with other players in South Africa and internationally. As I stand before you today, after the hard work of the EFF in Parliament, it was on the 1st of April 2022 that the Independent Communication Authority of South Africa, ICASA, amended the mass carry regulation, and they now require subscription broadcasters to carry the public broadcasters' channels, subject to commercially negotiable terms. The EFF was at the forefront of correcting a historical wrong that had given subscription broadcasters the right to carry SABC channels at no cost since the enforcement of the mass carry regulations in 2008. Delegates of the Third National People's Assembly, in 2019, it was resolved that the EFF establish alternative broadcast, radio, print media to guard against negative characterization of socialist ideas and the left in general. Seated here today, the EFF has its own state-of-the-art studios at Winnie Madikizela Mandela House, wherein we record our own weekly podcast. We remain the only political party to have established its own consistent podcast platform. Delegates, seated here today, the EFF has its own newsletter, The Radical Voice, which publishes the work of the EFF in all spheres of government and reflects on both internal and external political phenomena. Fellow fighters, it was the EFF that resolved that South Africa should direct its focus to primary health care and build a caring system that provides comprehensive, educational, accessible, and community-based care that meets the health needs of individuals throughout their lives. Furthermore, to this, we resolved in the second NPA that the 6th Parliament should finalize the National Health Amendment Bill to ensure clinics are open 24 hours. Today, we can report to you that the EFF has indeed fought in Parliament that clinics must operate 24 hours, and this was rejected by the former liberation movement, which was also rejected itself on 29 May 2024. We did not allow this to be an obstacle. However, through our MMC of Health in Johannesburg, we have opened Orchards Clinic here in Johannesburg, a state-of-the-art facility that operates 24/7 to demonstrate that it is indeed both practical and possible to have clinics open 24 hours, 7 days a week. Fighters, as part of our 7 non-negotiable cardinal pillars, we reaffirmed our posture on the nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank and placing it under the direct ownership and management of the state. Further to this, the second NPA resolved that we must call for the expansion of the South African Reserve Bank's mandate to use monetary policy to boost employment and increase capital available in the economy. Comrades, I can report proudly as I stand before you today that through the efforts of the EFF, the 7th Parliament is currently looking at ways in which we can nationalize the Reserve Bank and expand its mandate. Public hearings are being hosted as part of the process of ultimately reclaiming the sovereignty of our currency and our fiscal policy. Comrades, as leadership collective, we were mandated to continue to expose, reject, and campaign against independent power producers, IPPs, who signs contracts with Eskom to generate electricity and sell it back to Eskom. To this day, it is only the EFF that waged a massive protest against Eskom in 2020, demanding an end to load shedding and, amongst other things, calling for an end to the parasitic role of IPPs at Eskom. Fellow fighters, the second NPA mandates us to continue to call for an end to the occupation of Palestine by apartheid Israel, to call for the complete isolation of Israel by South Africa. In all international bodies, apartheid Israel should not be allowed to participate in international sporting platforms such as World Cup, the Olympics, and other international sporting code. To heed this mandate, it is the EFF that marched to the Israeli embassy calling for its closure because we cannot host genocidal nations that murder women and children, bomb hospitals, and target sites of religious worship. We went further and proposed a motion in the 6th Parliament of South Africa calling for the expulsion of the Israeli embassy and the cutting of all ties with Israel. A motion supported by a majority of members of Parliament and adopted by the National Assembly. Your cowardly president of South Africa, who speaks with forked tongues on the genocide against Palestine, has to this day not implemented the resolution which was successfully passed in Parliament. Comrades, the second NPA rejected the Mswati regime and demanded that that regime must end with immediate effect. It was this second NPA that mandated us to go and close the borders of Eswatini in rejecting Mswati's regime. It was from this rallying call that the EFF protested at all border gates connecting South Africa and Eswatini in solidarity with the calls for democracy in Eswatini. We have gone as far as supporting the liberation movements such as the EFF Eswatini and Pudemo, and will continue to do so until the regime of Mswati falls in memory of Mario Masuku, former president of Pudemo, and Nombulala Mota, the first president of the EFF Eswatini. Fighters, it was the EFF and the Second National People's Assembly which called for all correctional services facilities and programs to be managed by government and not private corporations or companies. Following the escape of Thabo Bester, it was the EFF that came out strongly against the control of Mangaung Correctional Center by Israeli-linked G4S and pushed for the announcement that the public-private partnership to run this prison must come to an end. To this day, G4S controls this prison, and we must intensify the call for this relationship to completely end now. With all these successes, fighters, some resolutions have not been met, including the resolution to establish a school named Winnie Madikizela Mandela Comprehensive School. This delay is as a result of disruptive COVID-19 pandemic and the incompetence of the municipality. However, we can assure you, fighters, that the land for the school has been secured the architecture has been developed, and even some of the journalists seated here today have been to the farm where the school will be built. They can also confirm that the work is ongoing. Commissars, we must additionally acknowledge that the resolution to form a women's command has not been fulfilled, as the challenges of COVID-19 almost completely closed the EFF's ability to operate normally as an organization. As a result, we had to focus on rebuilding and organizing ourselves again. All the resolutions taken by the second NPA must be revisited, and this third NPA must take a decision on a way forward. It is the duty of this third NPA to either reaffirm their necessity or determine that what is to be done. The Secretary General will provide a detailed report on the implementation of resolutions of the Second National People's Assembly. Delegates, the EFF has for over a decade remained the organization that has confronted existing conditions in South Africa and brought light to the issues that have for the longest time been kept under the rug, such as the need to expropriate land without compensation, the need to crush the remains of the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. Over the past 5 years, the organization has, amongst other things, called for the unsealing of CR17 documents which were wrongly sealed in the name of accountability, and mobilized the working class, calling on South Africans to participate in the public hearing of land expropriation without compensation. In the history of South African politics, no organization has emerged as a prominent voice consistently championing the rights of the black working class and the economically dispossessed through its various programs of action. Fighters, on the 13th to the 16th of December 2019, delegates from branches across the country gathered here at the NASREC Expo Centre under the theme Consolidating the Grounds Towards Socialist Power for the organization's Second National People's Assembly. These 3,100 delegates who attended the Second National People's Assembly had an organizational obligation to reflect on the policy position of our organization, re-strategize and reposition it to provide solution to the problems confronting South Africa, the continent and the world, and as such, gave the new leadership a mandate for the next 5 years. In the next following weeks, a successful Second National People's Assembly, a plenum was convened in February 2020, which adopted the program of the year, as well as the theme of the year being the year of action against racist financial sector. This came from the undertaking that the lack of transformation in the economy, the lack of jobs, and as the privatization of state-owned enterprises such as Eskom will further impoverish our people. More than 90.5% of total banking sector assets are controlled by the top 5 banks such as Standard Bank, FNB, Absa, Capitec, Nedbank, and all of which are white-owned. The same is true of the insurance sector and many other sectors of the country. Moreover, there are more than 8.1 million young people between the ages of 15 to 34 who are supposed to be transitioning from dependency to becoming independent, productive members of society, adding value to the country's GDP, but are not in education, training, or employment. The year of action against the racist financial sector also marked 7 years of the organization's existence, allowing it to evolve into a reliable, genuine, and credible movement of hope for our people. However, it must be noted that this was during a critical moment in the history of our country and the world, as we witnessed the surge of coronavirus pandemic, a pandemic that resulted in sickness and death of many, both domestically and abroad. This COVID-19 outbreak led to the cancellation of many of the organization's programs and tested the strength and survival of the EFF. As circumstances forced us to adopt conditions that were against our usual way of doing things. Fellow fighters, we navigated this through collective wisdom of organization, which provided solutions and showed its capacity to influence the political landscape on what needed to be done, doing so with conviction. Amidst this global crisis, the organization's character as the last hope of the people was successfully maintained through active engagement in organizational activism such as online membership system, virtual meetings, and the EFF Book Club. It was during this period that the organization donated 15 million to the COVID-19 Solidarity Fund as a result of a dedicated and disciplined EFF representatives who sacrificed a third of their salaries to contribute to the fight against the spread of COVID-19. The time then came to fight against the power of white monopoly in our country. We called upon all formations on the left, from trade unions to community organizations, to embark on a national march to the ESCOM headquarters. The march denounced load shedding, the privatization of ESCOM, and state-owned enterprises. ESCOM was a significant threat to the fiscus and the South African economy. Its collapse would have led to the unimaginable failure of the country. Following the anti-black racism displayed by the pharmaceutical outlet Clicks in a racist advert, the EFF embarked on a direct action at Clicks stores nationwide to demand accountability and confronted racism. It is now commonplace for the oppressed, whether at school, whether at work, whether in business, to call on the EFF for intervention when confronted with racism, as was the case with Clicks. At all material times, we condemn racism and provide cogent accounts against myths that undermine the program and cardinal pillars of our organization. As such, a clarion call was made to stand in defense of the judiciary and state asset against racist right-wing groups in Senegal in Free State Province. In 2021, the world continued battling the invisible enemy called coronavirus, raising questions of relevance, decisiveness, and leadership regarding our revolutionary organization. This period tested the character of the organization as the public sought empirical and workable solutions to their problems. As an organization, we reflected on organizational, domestic, and international challenges and took concrete resolution to guide the economic emancipation movement in the period ahead. Despite the senseless lockdowns imposed by the government, which closed the political landscape and prohibited accountability and campaigning activities, even during an election year, we carried our programs. One of the wars that the organization successfully engaged in was against vaccine apartheid, where we demonstrated in the march to save lives at the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority offices, also highlighting the failure of government's vaccination program, the loyalty of government to vaccine producers aligned to capitalism and the West, the capture of SAPRA, and the demand for CoronaVac vaccine produced by Sinovac and the Sputnik V vaccine from Russia. Our correct conviction was that it is only through scientifically tested and proven vaccines that the world could permanently contain the spread of the coronavirus. Fighters, it was through the march to save lives at SAPRA that a few days later, coronavac vaccine was authorized for distribution in South Africa, demonstrating that we are the only organization that prioritizes our people. This one, it will need water. The one I'm about to deal with. Chairs, fighters. Fighters. The integrity of our judiciary is paramount, and we may be critical of our judiciary at times, but we must protect the ideas of the rule of law and the constitutional supremacy, especially in a volatile situation, even if it means paying a visit to try and convince a former president to comply with the Constitutional Court and the Zondo Commission. The rule of law in South Africa is applied selectively, and a section of judiciary is co-opted. Despite this, an intervention needed to be made when there was an ill-advised decision to arrest the former state president, and in an attempt to plead with him to comply with the directive of the Zondo Commission, we visited him at his home state. We did so publicly and transparently during the day. This was necessary because at the time we foresaw the bloodshed to come, which could come in the former state president's name, and we knew that this was avoidable. It is unfortunate that our plea fell on deaf ears and that today our intervention is misrepresented as part of some political ploy gone wrong. We, as the EFF, will never associate with individuals who have stolen government money and resources for their own benefit, nor will we ever associate with any faction in any political party. Our interest at the time was to protect innocent lives that will be lost, and for attempting to do this, we regret nothing, because we did it out of love for the people, for our people and the nation of South Africa. Fighters and commissars, our distinguished guests, I'm happy to report that we were vindicated when the former president was arrested, and his arrest led to the 21 July 2021 unrest and senseless killings of black people. Had our intervention succeeded, the tragic loss of black life massacred in Phoenix and other parts of KwaZulu-Natal could have been prevented. Superior logic. Fighters, we have reflected on the importance of internal democracy, and consistent with this, we have convened branch people's assemblies and presided over 52 regional people's assemblies across South Africa. The Central Command team resolved that prior to the 2021 local government elections, all EFF regions must convene regional people's assembly to elect regional leadership and adopt localized election campaign programs that resonate with the EFF election victory manual adopted by the CCT, endorsed by the plenum. If we were dictators, we would not have held these organizational programs and activities. We would have ignored the principle of elected leadership and simply held on to power. However, because we genuinely believe in democratically elected leadership, we continued with these programs. The majority of programs were carried out successfully despite the conditions at the time, such as the senseless and poorly managed lockdowns by the government and the closed political landscape. The year 2022 marked 9 years since the formation of the EFF, where the CCT resolved on a campaign to recruit 1 million active and dependable members under the theme, Year of the Branch. This was also a means to raise the political consciousness of the people while ensuring the EFF is represented in every corner of South Africa. The campaign was officially launched on the 18th of February at Hector Peterson Square in Soweto. As part of the program, all EFF branches, sub-regions, regions, and provinces were given their own targets on the voting population and past performances. Before the end of December 2022, All regions and provinces reached their targets with a total of 1,085,843 paid-up members in good standing, exceeding the target by more than 85,000. Leaders and members of the EFF across all structures, this massive victory was made possible by your dedication and commitment. As we speak now, the EFF has verifiable membership across the length and breadth of our country. Fighters, the campaign of the year of the branch ran at the same time as the third provincial people's assemblies, which elected new leaders and adopted a program of action. Following the electoral decline of votes and seats in Limpopo, the CCT resolved to disband the Limpopo Provincial Command Team, all regional command team and branch command teams, to rebuild all constitutional structures and recruit members towards the Provincial People's Assembly. On the 24th of January, we convened an 2022, we convened an induction of all public representatives. The induction was attended by the leadership from various structures and more than 1,100 public representatives, including 1,066 councillors across South Africa. The public representatives deliberated on the founding manifesto of the EFF, revolutionary code of discipline, and code of conduct for all caucuses and public representatives, and were made to understand the responsibility entrusted to them by the people. The need to accelerate the call for the expropriation of land without compensation remains key. This is why we led a confrontation of Johan Rupert in his properties in Stellenbosch, demanding the return of our land and exposing his influence over the economic and political scene of our country. We picketed with our opposition parties in September 2022 after the acting public protector failed to release the Phala report. Chapter 9 institutions must never be allowed to be co-opted into factional and crime-hiding activities to the extent of protecting individuals. Our organization has been fighting for the Pan-African Parliament to mold itself into an institution with legislative authority across the continent. We also advocated for the principle of rotation at the Pan-African Parliament, which resulted in Chief Fortune Charumbira, a member of parliament from Zimbabwe, being elected as the president of the Pan-African Parliament and the first leader from the SADC region. The year 2023, 10 years since the formation of the EFF, a remarkable achievement that is a testament to the ideological and organizational strength of this economic emancipation movement. It was a year marked as the year of massive political education and voter registration. This deliberate effort was taken to convert the quantitative strength of the EFF into quality through mass-based political education to ensure that all 1 million members of the EFF understand and comprehend the policies of our organization and are able to advance and defend the agenda of economic freedom in our lifetime. We also understood that the electoral victory of the EFF, as well as the integrity and the sustainability of the democratic project in South Africa, is dependent on the elimination of voter apathy. Moreover, it was now the time for our organization to create its own voter population ahead of the 2024 national and provincial government elections. The launch of the mass voter registration campaign took place in April 2023 at Diepsloot, an area with the highest number of unregistered eligible voters. We started the year with a decisive victory in the by-election in Ward 10 in Polokwane, Limpopo. The victory in Ward 10, coupled with a remarkable increase in votes for the EFF in Ward 17 in Blouberg Municipality. Limpopo from 302, Ward 17 in Blouberg Municipality in Limpopo, from 302 votes to 953, further painted the promising picture of the rebuilding process in Limpopo. Over the past 10 years, the organization has exceptionally grown, reaching a stage where we are ready to govern. One of the ways this was demonstrated was through the Andries Tatana cleanup campaign, launched in February 2023. This campaign was named after a fearless community activist who was brutally killed by the ruling party for protesting and demanding water, electricity, sanitation, and service delivery in Vicksburg, Free State in April 2011. As a revolutionary and responsible movement of the people of South Africa, we engaged in the following activities. After the revelation of millions of dollars stuffed at Palapala farm, we wrote questions to Cyril Ramaphosa in Parliament, requesting him to explain the source of the money and to disclose any other millions hidden in his property. We further sought to hold Ramaphosa accountable for presiding over the collapse of South Africa during the State of the Nation address in February 2023. We engaged the South African Reserve Bank, the South African Revenue Services, the financial intelligence, and all relevant structures, demanding that Ramaphosa be held accountable. Our organization approached the courts of South Africa to compel Parliament to conduct a thorough and transparent investigation into all the crimes committed by Cyril Ramaphosa with the aim of building a solid case for impeachment. We also approached political parties in Parliament to engage in motion of no confidence against Cyril Ramaphosa as President of South Africa. An independent panel led by former Constitutional Court Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo, appointed by the Speaker of the National Assembly, found that the President had a case to answer. When the National Assembly resolved to ignore the independent panel report and its finding, we approached the Constitutional Court to challenge this decision as irrational and abdication of its constitutional obligation to hold the President accountable. The matter was heard by the Constitutional Court last month, and the judgment is reserved. For as long as the EFF exists, Palapala will not die until the person in the office of the President today is arrested and appears before a court of law. It is a matter of when, not if it will happen, because it is going to happen. Fighters, we further planned a national shutdown due to rising cost of living for all South Africans, the rising levels of unemployment and poverty, increasing levels of crime, particularly murder and gender-based violence, rising levels of corruption, lack of service delivery, and collapsing public infrastructure, particularly hospitals and roads. Former liberation movement's decision to close down coal power station without consultation with the people of South Africa. The Palapala scandal involving numerous criminal activities. The national shutdown called for the immediate end to the load shedding and the resignation of Cyril Ramaphosa, sending a clear message to the sitting government that enough is enough. In the past 5 years, we refused to fold our arms and turn a blind eye when the living conditions of our people continue to deteriorate, with the increasing price of food, transport, and electricity pushing many deeper into poverty. This national shutdown was the most revolutionary act. We successfully shut down the economy and brought many towns and cities across the country to a standstill, demonstrating the collective power of the people. The national shutdown was made possible by the unwavering commitment and hard work of our commissars and ground forces, who mobilized communities, organized actions that shook the foundation of the establishment. Today, we are vindicated as we witnessed over 250 days without electricity blackouts, a decision to stop the premature closure of coal power stations, ensuring a more stable energy supply. We are proud that it was the EFF shutdown that stopped the load shedding in South Africa, and no one can doubt us. These victories are not incidental. They are a tangible outcome of the EFF's national shutdown. Our organization also celebrated its 10th anniversary at the FNB Stadium on the 29th of July 2023 in what was the biggest ever festival of the poor. Thousands flocked to the stadium, and society bore witness to a celebration that re-energized our movement towards the liberation of Africans from the chains of humiliation, landlessness, and oppression under the theme, 10 years of unbroken struggle. This led up to the Festival of the Poor, included celebratory events such as visits to old age homes, orphanages, disability centers, the traveling play titled Luruo that was viewed across all 9 provinces, the 10th anniversary exhibition, the launch of the 5th Jazz Hour album, the commemorative walk, EFF Carnival, and public lecture, the 10th anniversary celebration, birthday celebration in Marikana, the gala dinner, and the diplomatic breakfast. It must be noted that no other political party has dared to attempt what we achieved at the FNB Stadium. We extend our gratitude to all councillors and public representatives who demonstrated unwavering discipline and adhered to the directive of the leadership by bringing buses filled with ground forces to the FNB Stadium. It is their collective commitment, dedication, and tireless efforts that made this historic gathering possible, showcasing the strength and unity of our revolutionary movement. Comrade fighters, the parliamentary work of the EFF stands as a testament to our unwavering commitment to the struggle for economic freedom, accountability, and justice for all South Africans. Since its inception, the unwavering commitment to the struggle for economic freedom, accountability, and justice for all South Africans. Since its inception, the EFF has worked tirelessly to ensure that Parliament becomes a site of genuine representation, robust debate, and decisive action to address the pressing issues facing our people. Between 2019 and the present, the EFF has demonstrated its position as the qualitative official opposition, even when not numerically dominant. We have transformed Parliament into a platform where the voices of the oppressed are amplified, where the executive is held accountable, where progressive ideas take center stage. Our interventions has made Parliament accessible to the people, ensuring it addresses their lived realities. While the former liberation movement abused its majority to block progressive reforms, the EFF consistently pushed for legislation that reflects aspirations of the people. We spearheaded efforts to amend Section 25 of the Constitution to allow the expropriation of land without compensation, a cornerstone of the economic emancipation struggle. Despite reactionary neoliberal forces hijacking the process by diluting the proposed amendment, the EFF maintained its principled stance, rejecting any compromise that fell short of full state custodianship of the land. Governance has been at a critical focus of the EFF's parliamentary work through its elected representative in Parliament, provincial legislatures, and municipal councils. The EFF has conducted rigorous oversight on the executive, ensuring that the interests of the people remain paramount. During the global COVID-19 pandemic, when governance structures were disrupted, the EFF adopted to ensure that oversight continues unabated. Our members of Parliament secured special permits to conduct inspections on public health facilities exposing government's failures in managing the crisis. We demanded accountability for the widespread corruption in COVID-19 procurement processes, ensuring that the looters of public funds were brought to public scrutiny. The EFF introduced and supported progressive legislation that seeks to transform the socio-economic landscape of South Africa. Key amongst this is the National Health Amendment Bill, aimed at ensuring clinics remain open 24 hours a day, improved access to healthcare. While the bill was rejected by the liberation movement with an excuse of fiscal constraints, the discussions about 24-hour clinics found expression in the highest legislative office in the country. Other legislative initiatives have included the South African Reserve Bank Amendment Bill, which seeks to nationalize the central bank, and the Student Cancellation Bill, aimed at alleviating the financial burden of young people pursuing higher education. Although met with resistance, this effort underscores the EFF's commitment to putting the needs of the people above neoliberal austerity measures. The EFF has been unrelenting in exposing corruption and mismanagement at the highest level of government. From the Pala farm scandal implicating the person in the office of the president to the maladministration in parliament itself, the EFF held those in power accountable. When the Speaker of the National Assembly was implicated in corruption, the EFF led the calls for her resignation, vindicated when charges were eventually laid against her. Fellow fighters, our parliamentary work has also confronted the systematic failure of the justice system, the collapse of state-owned entities, and the neglect of public infrastructure. We have consistently called for the reopening of Komati Power Station and demanded the funding for the maintenance of Eskom's fleet, exposing the sabotage of state-owned enterprises to advance private sector interests. The EFF has defended the Constitution from attacks by reactionary forces seeking to undermine the democratic gains made since 1994. We have opposed attempts to weaken parliamentary processes, including the decision to relocate Parliament to inadequate facilities following the fire in 2022. Our call for the relocation of Parliament to Tshwane remains rooted in the principle of aligning legislative and administrative functions for greater efficiency. The EFF parliamentary work extends beyond the confines of legislatures. Through public hearings, submissions, and direct engagements with communities, the EFF has ensured that the voices of the marginalized are heard. We have mobilized support for the Basic Educational Law Amendment Bill, Bella Bill, fighting against those who seek to use language as a barrier to access state-funded schools. Similarly, our engagements with artists, creative, and legal experts on the Copyright Amendment Bill has positioned the EFF as a defender of cultural and intellectual rights. Delegates and the people of South Africa, the last time we addressed a gathering of this nature in 2019, we made an honest and objective assessment. The EFF had not built adequate internal capacity to win municipal ward-based elections. We raised this as a huge challenge because municipal elections are partially ward-based. We acknowledged that we needed to build capacity to win wards in order to win municipalities. South Africa's 5th municipal elections, held on the 1st of November 2021, were the movement's 2nd municipal elections. Despite our honest and objective assessment in 2019 about the need to build adequate internal capacity, the 2021 municipal election took place under trying and difficult circumstances. While South Africa, Africa and the world were contending with the COVID-19 pandemic, unimaginable loss of life, disruptive livelihoods, and an economic crisis, we had to contend with municipal elections. Fellow fighters, soon after this second Central Command team was elected in December 2019. Starting on the 26th of March 2020, no more than 3 months later, the country went into lockdown, entering alert level 5. This was the most stringent level of the national lockdown, meaning that all political party activities were prohibited. We had to close our offices, cancel all activities, mobilize programs, and adapt to unprecedented reality. This was our reality for the most of 2020 and 2021, as the government implemented different levels of lockdown. We spent much of this time attending funerals of loved ones, friends, fighters, while still having to think about elections. It was under these conditions that we had to plan for the 2021 municipal election. The first election date was announced in April 2021, and we're told that election will take place on the 27th of October 2021. However, the COVID-19 pandemic proved to be unpredictable, which led to the change in the date of the elections. Eventually, the government announced in September 2021 that election will take place on the 1st of November 2021. This effectively meant that the Central Command team, without any meaningful interaction with structures of the organization or members, had no more than 41 days to establish election structures. Commissars and fighters, we remind you of this important background because it is this very context, together with our honest and objective assessment about the absence of internal capacity to win municipal wards, that we must keep in our minds to understand and assess the performance of our organization in 2021 municipal elections. We relied on the spirits, commitment, and dedication of fighters and ground forces, as well as the experience of the 2014-2019 national and provincial election and the 2016 municipal elections to contest against 324 political parties, including independent candidates, for more than 10,000 municipal seats across all 257 municipalities. We contested all 4,468 municipal wards and received more than 3.2 million votes. Not only did we maintain our 2016 electoral support, but more importantly, we increased it. It was these votes that gave us a total of 1,066 municipal council seats, increasing the organization seats increasing organizational seats by 240. While this was not what we hoped for, we increased the number of ward seats we won from 11 in 2016 to 19. Comrades, it was the 2021 municipal election that marked the first time since the dawn of democracy that the former liberation movement lost its electoral majority and fell below 50% in an election. As we said, it is not going to get better for the liberation movement. It is this performance that solidified the EFF's place in South Africa's political landscape. It is this performance that silenced the doomsayers who claimed that our 2016 electoral success was fluke. It is this performance that sent the strong message: the EFF is indeed a government in waiting. Fellow fighters, it is this performance that solidified the EFF as a national party, not a tribalistic party or a cultural group, not a regionalistic party confined to one province, not a racist party serving the interest of white people, not a sexist, patriarchal party dominated by men at leadership level. You will find fighters and ground forces in Musina in Limpopo, in Malalane in Mpumalanga, in Ropane in Northwest, in Appington in Saldanha, in Kabeja in Lusikisiki, in Korobeni, in Kwa Dukuza, and in Matungulo near the border between South Africa and Mozambique in KwaZulu-Natal. Comrades, we were amongst the first political party to thank the people of South Africa who voted in the 2021 municipal elections. We were the first political party to welcome the election result as an expression of the wishes and will of the people, a testament to our maturing democracy. We were the first political party to acknowledge that the 2021 municipal election were not perfect, understanding that it was impossible to have a perfect election organized within such a short space of time. We were also the first political party to call on all political parties to put their ideological and political differences aside and prioritize the delivery of services to our people. We called on all political parties to prioritize delivery of clean, drinkable and dependable water, proper sanitation and reliable electricity. We called on all political parties to sign a pact committing that within the next 5 years, no home or school in South Africa will lack proper sanitation. We made it clear that we are willing to listen and engage with everyone as long as the priority remains our people and restoring their dignity. We made it very clear that we will not compromise on coalitions for positions of power's sake. We said we were willing and prepared to vote for anyone who's committed to giving the people of Hammanskraal water within the first 6 months. We said we were willing and prepared to vote for anyone who had a clear program of action with specific timelines and measurable deliverables. And we said that should any political party not agree with us, we were happy to sit on the opposition benches. We did this because we refused to impose ourselves on the people of South Africa. We accepted that only when our people are ready to embrace our radical policies, we will take full control of these municipalities. We are not guided by uncontrollable ambitions, ego, or hunger for power, especially when it risks compromising the EFF strategic mission. After the 2021 municipal elections, we played a meaningful role in governance in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, taking strategic positions as deputy mayors in municipalities such as Umtatuze, Utukela, Umtuwatua, Nongoma, Amajuba, Denhauser, Mapumulo, and Zululand. Today, this organization has councillors who are members of mayoral committees through political arrangement in the city of Johannesburg, the city of Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, and Nelson Mandela Bay, responsible for public safety, health, environment, and waste, water, electricity, finance, and corporate services. The EFF regional chairperson and councillor in eThekwini is the chairperson of Human Settlement and Engineering Committee in eThekwini municipality. The people of Tshwane, in Hammanskraal, Soshanguve, Mabopane, and the CBD are enjoying the clean city because of the work of the EFF MMC. The people of Ekurhuleni, in Mooifontein, Tembisa, Winnie Mandela, Vosloorus, Thokoza, Duduza, and Springs witness a citywide cleaning of illegal dumping sites because it is the EFF MMC responsible for environmental resources and waste management who launched Clean Your Kasi Manje Namhlanje campaign. The people of Johannesburg, Soweto, Alexandra, Diepsloot, Hillbrow, Newtown, and Braamfontein are beginning to witness metropolis visibility because it is the EFF MMC responsible for public safety who through his campaign, Operation Noma Kanjani, Manje Namhlanje, has deployed boots on the ground. The people of Nelson Mandela Bay in Walma Ward 4 have electricity today because it was an EFF MMC of electricity and energy who responded to complaints when the area did not have electricity in a long time because of a damaged cable. Today, it is because of the chairperson of Human Settlement Committee in eThekwini that the people of Umlazi and KwaMakhuta have moved from hostels to newly built houses and have seen hostels converted into family units, restoring their dignity. It is through this deployment that our organization is at the forefront of service delivery. The EFF is no longer just a government in waiting. We are in government. Our councillors are chairs of strategic committees in many municipal councils. They are chairpersons of municipal public account committees, whips of councils, speakers of municipal councils, including being the speaker of Ekurhuleni Metropolitan Municipal Council. We have a solid governance experience. The people of Tshwane are enjoying exemplary government under the leadership of the EFF, with visible service delivery and hands-on governance that directly addresses the needs of the people. However, the people of Johannesburg are being denied the same experience because EFF is deliberately excluded from strategic portfolios that will bring our MMCs into direct and daily contact with the communities to resolve the service delivery challenges. Comrades, we want that while we accept that revolution is about longevity, it is not a sprint but a marathon, a long distance marathon. There will be an intensive campaign by the white establishment to prevent the EFF from ascending to state power. I must drink water. Cheers. Cheers. The white capitalist establishment knows that the fight for state and economic power in South Africa is between the EFF and the neoliberal forces, no one else. When it became clear that the former liberation movement was going to lose its majority electoral support in the national elections, the white capitalist establishment came out of the shadows and began attacking the EFF both directly and indirectly. In the 2024 general elections marked the first time that the descendants of white supremacists and mining conglomerates, alongside billionaires who amassed their wealth through poorly regulated and exploitative online gambling that preys on the poverty of our people, came out from the background and shadows. These forces included the Stellenbosch mafias, openly donated millions to neoliberal forces and political startups. These startups were deliberately designed to divide black votes as part of a calculated strategy to block the EFF from going to government. Their action exposed a coordinated effort to undermine a revolutionary movement and maintain the status quo of economic and political power in the hands of privileged elite. Some of these political startups, despite receiving millions, even failed to meet the most basic requirement, such as securing the minimum number of 1,000 registered voters required to register of a political party. These families, individuals and their trust contributed nearly R500 billion between 2021 and 2023 to fight and demonize the EFF. This is only the amount reported to IEC, and we believe there is even more money that was not reported to the IEC. To the racist, white, supremacist, capitalist establishment, the 2024 election was supposed to be a surgical remove. Were supposed to surgically remove the EFF from South Africa's political landscape, and they were willing to go all out and spend millions. We went into these elections knowing very well that we will be fighting for our survival, to protect strategic mission for economic freedom in our lifetime, to defend the legacy of the Marikana workers, to defend the legacy of Andries Tatana, of Winnie Madikizela Mandela. For us, it was war for survival. We established our election machinery in August 2023 by setting up branch election task forces in South Africa's 4,468 wards and setting up voting district election task forces in South Africa's 23,296 voting districts. We also traveled across the country between November and December 2023, capacitating the ground forces through provincial ground forces forums. The year 2024 marks the third national and provincial election that the organization contested after the 2014 and 2019 general elections. These elections took place 30 years after the dawn of democracy, with research pointing to no obvious winner compared to previous elections. We began 2024 by joining the ground forces and community members of the eThekwini region, KwaZulu-Natal, in preparation for the manifesto launch, which was successfully held on the 10th of February 2024 at Moses Mabhida Stadium in KwaZulu-Natal, thanks to the provincial leadership of KZN. The 2024 elections represented a massive opportunity for change and the upliftment of the lives of South Africans. As such, when the Independent Electoral Commission, the IEC, another branch of the ANC, announced its second voter registration weekend, we called on all our people of South Africa to come out in their numbers, mobilizing ourselves in all voting stations across the country to ensure maximum participation in the voter registration process. The manifesto of the EFF was then unveiled to the public, voters at the election manifesto launch rally. This was preceded by intensive media drive to unpack our manifesto, including media engagements, television interviews, dialogues addressing various issues. We also engaged with ordinary South Africans in all provinces through presidential campaign. Before the much anticipated elections, we engaged in community outreach programs, donating and handing over boreholes, building homes and youth centers in Amaja. As part of engagement with the media and members of the academic community, the President and the Commander-in-Chief hosted a brunch with editors, political journalists, and analysts from various media houses. Fellow fighters, the Grand Coalition government of neoliberal forces originated as a moonshot pact, which included the former liberation movement. The former liberation movement has always been part and parcel of this moonshot pact, which later evolved into a Grand Coalition government, so-called Government of National Unity, GNU. This is the moonshot pact that was formed to reject NHI bill, the National Health Insurance Bill, to make universal health accessible for all. The moonshot pact that was formed to reject Bella Bill, the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill, to make our education accessible for all regardless of race and language. Moonshot pact that was formed to oppose the creation of state-owned bank and sovereign wealth fund to transform the financial sector. The moonshot pact that was formed to fight progressive labor legislation in favor of exploitative labor laws. They want to hire and dismiss workers as they wish without being held accountable. This same moonshot pact was formed to fast-track the privatization of electricity generation and transmission, as well as the treatment of water and sanitation. In this moonshot pact that was converted into a grand coalition government of neoliberal forces, the former liberation movement has always been part of this arrangement. When we accepted the election result and said we're ready to go into coalition, little did we know that the former liberation movement was already embedded in the Moonshot Pact. We gave the former liberation movement the benefit of the doubt that they will engage with consciousness and negotiate for service delivery that restores the dignity of black people, transfer the wealth of the country to the majority, provide our people with affordable and dependable electricity, delivers long overdue justice to victims of apartheid and Marikana workers. Instead, those who have successfully hijacked the liberation movement chose a coalition rooted in racism and colonial economic structure. They chose a coalition that is eroding the state and fast-tracking the implementation of privatization. Under this coalition of neoliberal forces, the state is being eroded and our people suffer the consequences. Everything from electricity, water, sanitation, waste removal services, policing and public safety, health, education, and all other public services will be rendered by the private sector for profit, while strategic state-owned companies are told to compete without any support. Delegates, the people of South Africa, our country is facing an economic crisis. It is a crisis caused by poor economic policy choices and by prioritizing the interest of the white capitalist establishment over the lives and well-being of our people. It is a crisis rooted in the cowardly decision of the former liberation movement to entrench the unjust sunset clause, allowing white people to keep ill-gotten gains of colonialism and apartheid, which have now become perpetual and permanent clauses. The economy of South Africa is not growing, has not been growing for the past 15 years. Between 1994 and 2008, South Africa's economy grew by an average of 3.6% annually. However, from 2009 to 2023, the GDP collapsed to an average of 1.2% per year, while other emerging and developing economies grew by an average of 6.3% per year. Under the fourth and the fifth administration, the economy grew by an average annual GDP growth of 1.9%. But this has further collapsed to an average annual GDP growth of 0.5 under the current president. This empirical, indisputable evidence that the past 15 years have been disastrous for our country. In the past 15 years, we have witnessed 24% decline in public investment by central government and public corporations. This decline in public investment has directly contributed to the collapse of our country's infrastructure, critical services, and the economy. It is the decline that has led to the collapse of electricity generation capacity, the collapse of logistics and transport networks, the collapse of water infrastructure, the collapse of telecommunication services. This decline is what has brought about the destruction of Eskom, Transnet, Denel, PRASA, the South African Post Offices, the SABC, and many other once glorious, competitive state-owned institutions that served as critical extension of government to deliver public services. Today, many of these institutions are a shadow of their former selves. We are facing a crisis of joblessness. Today, South Africa's unemployment rate is at 41.9%. More than 12.2 million people are unemployed, and 3 million of them have given up even looking for a job. Unemployment has increased from 6.4 million in 2009 to 12.2 million to date. These 12.2 million people wake up every day with nothing to do. They wake up to loiter the streets, pushed into lives of crime, substance abuse, and gender-based violence. The failure to address unemployment has created a lost generation condemned to hopelessness by economic systems that prioritize profit over people. It is this unemployment that affects black people, women, and young people the most. The unemployment rate among black people stands at 46%, while the white people, it stands at 10.8%. The unemployment rate for people between the age of 15 and 24 stands at an alarming 70.7%. Among women, unemployment stands at 45.7% compared to the 38.5% for men. Today, there is no practical, believable, or implementable plan to address this crisis. Instead, the biggest so-called economic reforms since 1996 promises to create only 1 million jobs over 10 years, a drop in the ocean compared to the millions of unemployed South Africans. Comrades, our country experienced economic sabotage when there was an attempt to switch off power stations. The EFF was the only organization that properly characterized this attempt as economic sabotage. The people who decided that the only way to establish their private energy generation business, make profits, and put themselves at the center of South Africa's economy by controlling energy and electricity generation and transmission, declared war on the people of South Africa and its economic interests, security, and sovereignty. When the former incompetent and racist CEO of Eskom appointed more for color of his skin than his capacity, said in 2021 that South Africa will face power cuts for another 5 years. It was the clearest indication that a war was being waged against South African economy. The intention was clear: collapse Eskom, sabotage state-owned energy and generation capacity, refuse to maintain the current coal power fleet, close power station under the pretense of their lifespan ending, and then, when the nation is desperate for blackouts and Eskom's failure, bring in the private sector as the savior. This is the modus operandi everywhere, where the parasitic capitalist establishment inserts itself into economic areas dominated by state-owned entities. Today, we are told that load shedding has cost South Africa 35 billion over 12 years between 2007 and 2019. Millions of jobs were lost because of load shedding. We were the only organization that spoke openly about the parasitic nature of renewable energy independent power producers and the power purchase agreement that forced Eskom to buy electricity from cronies of the person in the office of the presidency at prices far higher than what it will cost Eskom to produce the same electricity. We called on the cancellation of all power purchase agreement with renewable energy independent power producers. Our logic was so superior that even the former Minister of Public Enterprise and Minister of Mineral Resources agreed that these contracts need to be cancelled. We were the only organization that spoke openly about the appointment of the racist who failed to manage a plastic packaging company, yet was appointed to run a complex and sensitive power utility without engineering or generation experience. We were the only organization in parliament when it was not fashionable to join workers in Komati to reject the premature closure of Komati Power Station and to demand its reopening. The criminals in charge of Eskom waging economic war against the country were allowed to unplug 1,000 megawatts without providing a plan. We consistently called for adequate funding for maintaining Eskom's fleet when National Treasury waged a war against Eskom by refusing to allocate funds for maintenance. We exposed how Eskom was overpaying for coal, particularly from Optimum Coal, once chaired by the person in the office of the presidency as part of a scheme to milk billions from power utility. We are happy that the current management at Eskom, led by an engineer, has begun to turn the institution around. While we remain concerned about the overall direction of energy policy in South Africa, we are pleased that there is now an agreement to stop switching off coal power stations and to continue maximally utilizing our coal resources. Those who took money in the name of the just transition will one day have to explain their actions and possibly stand trial for crimes against South Africa's economy. We call on a commission of inquiry into the load shedding that our people were subjected to for more than a decade while people were stealing money by burning oil and benefiting from IPPs. We need to know who the culprits were behind the economic sabotage. South Africa needs a state-led and state-owned energy policy that will expand Eskom's generation capacity, reverse privatization of Eskom, invest in building additional coal power stations. We must increase the energy mix by building nuclear power stations and investing in renewable energy. Eskom must be given a new lease of life. The Public Investment Corporation must take over Eskom's debt in exchange for partial ownership, among other measures. This will require decisive intervention to reverse the counter-revolutionary decision to privatize electricity generation and transmission. If we allow privatization of electricity, our people will not afford it. Even today, electricity is unaffordable for many, including middle-class families. Fellow fighters, our public transport infrastructure and logistics network have collapsed. This is why our highways are congested with trucks. Trucks are killing people on N2 between the mines in Mpumalanga and Richards Bay because the former liberation movement has neglected railway infrastructure. Transnet has collapsed. The neoliberal coalition government is working day and night to privatize transport and logistics network, including ports, before we remove them from power. Privatizing logistics and transport network means leaving development and economic growth at the mercy of private interests whose only priority is profit, not national interest. PRASA has collapsed and Metro Rail is in shambles. The poor and working class spend the majority of their wages on transport, commuting to work. They leave home in the early hours of the morning and returning in the darkness, ensuring unsafe and unreliable services. The taxi industry continues to operate without guiding legislation, regulation, and formalization, and it receives no financial support or subsidy from government. This is why the majority of minibuses on our roads are not roadworthy and are at the center of the carnage on our roads, and the Department of Transport is nowhere to be found. Comrades, South Africa's economy does not produce the things we use on a daily basis. We don't produce many of the electronics, plastic products, clothing we wear, or even much of the food we consume. Despite the advanced technology to build military equipment, including the Roy Falk produced by Dinel and one of the most sophisticated and sought-after war machines in the world, we still not have a made in South Africa car. We are not talking about assembly plants that import car parts from Europe, America, and Asia in boxes to be assembled in Silverton, Roslyn, Gqeberha, and East London. We are talking about creating a car from scratch and putting it on the market, supported by the state through off-take agreements and subsidies. We have watched as our country has deindustrialized over the past 30 years, with manufacturing contributing to GDP falling from 24% in the early 90s to just below 15% today. We have lost the war against crime. It is only the Provincial Commissioner of KwaZulu-Natal who is committed and willing to meet criminals in the street toe for toe and take them head on. Everywhere else, we have lost the war. More than 27,000 people are murdered annually. There is no plan to stop the high murder rate. In the past 10 years, nearly 500,000 cases of rape were reported to the police and many went unreported. Yet as a country, we still don't have a plan to stop the scourge of rape. In the past reporting year, there's been an increase in the number of contact crimes, including murder, sexual offenses, attempted murder, common assault, common robbery, and robbery with aggravating circumstances. Yet, there is no plan to confront criminals head on. Our men and women in blue are underpaid and work in poor conditions, blocked toilets, collapsing ceilings, inadequate sanitation. They lack political support and the necessary infrastructure, yet they are expected to fight crime effectively. The former liberation movement has deliberately neglected our defense capacity. The former minister of the defense told Parliament last year that we must decide as a country whether we want defense capabilities or not, because at the current funding level, South Africa's defense forces exist only on paper. Our courts and justice system are broken. Access to justice depends on money. We still have judiciary that remains untransformed, rooted in racism and colonial structures. Those without money, in particular black people, are victims of unjust systems. Judges and magistrates are working under very difficult conditions. Many are depressed, yet are expected to deliver justice. The NPA has lost all its legitimacy. It is clear that the incompetent national director was appointed for factional reasons and to serve a specific agenda. She has failed to turn the institution around and instead worsened its state. Over the past 5 years, we have been subjected to senseless and questionable decisions, the appointment of more incompetent individuals and blatant attempts to hand over the NPA to the control of white capitalist interests. This institution, once a pillar of justice, has become a shadow of its former self. There is also a growing crisis of abandoned mines in Gauteng, Mpumalanga, and Northwest. The mining companies responsible for rehabilitating the land after extraction have been allowed to escape accountability. As a result, the failure of government oversight has paved the way for unregulated artisanal mining and criminal syndicates to exploit the gap. Communities are suffering, people are dying in sinkholes, illegal mine shafts, and the government's response, sanctioned by cabinet, is to forcefully smoke them out instead of addressing the root causes of the problem and arrest culprits who are part of a wider network of criminal syndicates selling these minerals in the black market. The senseless killing of women and children has become a pandemic. Weak men, emboldened by lack of consequences, are targeting the most vulnerable, waging a war against women and children. Women are subjected to extortion, forced to leave money on their windows to avoid being raped at night. Despite the promises made by the individual occupying the office of the president, nothing tangible has been achieved. Empty promises and useless consultative meetings have done nothing to stop the daily murder of women and children. Police stations are ill-equipped to handle gender-based violent cases, lacking dedicated and safe spaces for victims to report crimes. To this day, There is still no mechanism for victims of GBV to report crimes from a comfort and safety of their homes. South Africa's justice system, law enforcement, and governance have failed to protect the people, women and children in particular. Instead of a coordinated and effective response, we are met with a silence, inaction, and misplaced priorities because of weak political leadership. The Department of Home Affairs, together with Defense, is responsible for protecting our sovereign borders. But this is only in theory. In reality, people come and go as they please. There is no capacity to document everyone in South Africa. As a result, we have put our people in serious danger. Those seeking economic and political asylum are also endangered, and this lack of control promotes lawlessness. The public education continues to deteriorate. The government has neglected public education, forcing many black middle-class families into private schools, while white families continue to benefit from well-resourced former Model C schools funded by the state. These schools have libraries, sports facilities, laboratories, while schools in rural areas and townships remain overcrowded, poorly resourced, and stuck in conditions of 1994. Teachers in these schools work under difficult conditions, struggling with unruly learners, substance abuse, and crime on school premises. Many teachers are choosing to resign without alternative jobs because it is better to be unemployed than to endure the hardship of public schools. This is why racists reject the Bela Act and forced the office of the presidency to succumb to their demands. They want to use language as a barrier to entry into state-funded schools. We reject this and demand the full implementation of Bela Bill. Despite the revolutionary fighting spirit of the fees must fall generation, we still do not have free higher education. Public health care has collapsed. Public hospitals have become places where our people go to die. Senior citizens prefer to stay at home when sick rather than go to hospitals because they know they are going to die. Clinics are underfunded, cannot operate 24 hours, and face general shortages of personnel and medication. Windows are broken, toilets don't work, patients are told to bring their own food, water, and linen when admitted. Instead of comprehensive primary health care, ensure that there is a clinic in every ward. The former liberation movement is obsessed with poorly considered NHI that has no capacity to resolve the crisis facing public health care. Municipalities have completely collapsed. The majority of municipalities are failing to deliver basic services, and they will not succeed if we continue with the current funding model. Municipalities receives only 9% of the revenue collected nationally by SARS and cannot collect enough of their own revenue. Only metropolitan municipalities such as Johannesburg, Cape Town, Ekurhuleni, and eThekwini collect some revenue. However, even these metros cannot deliver services to all their residents effectively. The problem is worsened by incompetent and corrupt municipal managers and city managers who own and control councillors. We have chief financial officers who are a serious threat in our municipalities. Chief financial officers who treat municipal funds as their personal money, distributing patronage while our people continue to suffer. Our people do not have clean drinkable water, reliable and affordable electricity, proper sanitation. They are still subjected to the indignity of bucket toilets and potholes on a daily basis. The former liberation movement has failed to eradicate housing backlog. Our people are forced to build shacks in flood areas, riverbanks, and unsafe places. When it rains, informal settlement are swept away, and our people immediately become homeless. Comrades and compatriots, our fight for economic freedom cannot succeed without reclaiming the state as a vehicle for radical and progressive transformation. Central to this mission is a state-led industrialization, a decisive intervention to reverse the decades of deindustrialization and create sustainable jobs for the millions excluded from economic participation. The South African economy must be structured to ensure that it produces goods and services we consume daily, eliminating dependency on imports that enrich sovereign economies at the expense of our own economy. State-led industrialization will focus on building industries that manufacture the essential we rely on, from clothing to electronics, and from agricultural equipment to vehicle design and manufactured entirely in South Africa. To complement this effort, we must restore the state's capacity to direct the economy through bold intervention. The state must directly invest in revitalizing industrial zones in underdeveloped regions, ensuring that the previous neglected areas such as Mokhwase, Putadichaba, Botshabelo, and Shandima become epicenters of manufacturing and innovation. By doing so, we will tackle regional inequality while creating employment opportunity closer to where people live. A progressive industrial strategy must be underpinned by research and development led by state-funded institutions. South Africa must become a leader in new industries such as green energy technologies, medical innovation, and advanced manufacturing. Our academic and technical institutions must partner with the state-owned enterprises to develop homegrown technologies that meet both local and global demand. We must also ensure that industrialization drives job creation for the most vulnerable. Labor-intensive industries such as textile, agro-processing, the assembly of renewable energy infrastructure must be a priority. Government procurement policies must guarantee market access for these industries, ensuring that public spending benefits the people directly. This agenda demands a robust state banking sector to finance industrial expansion. The establishment of a state bank will ensure that affordable loans are made available to emerging businesses and cooperative enterprises. Furthermore, the Public Investment Corporation must play a critical role in channeling resources towards long-term industrial development rather than speculative markets that do not serve the interest of the people. Comrades, reclaiming the state for industrialization is also about asserting national sovereignty. South Africa's vast natural resources must be used to build local industries. Our mineral wealth must no longer be exported as raw material, but processed domestically into high-value goods. This will not only create jobs, but also ensure that the wealth of our nation benefits its people. To achieve this, we must reverse privatization of key sectors, including energy, logistics, and telecommunication. Privatization has weakened our capacity to plan and build for the future. We must reclaim Eskom, Transnet, and other state-owned enterprises because they are at the center of state-led industrialization. Comrades, this is not just about building factories and infrastructure. It is about rebuilding the hope of millions who wake up every day without work or purpose and a fight against neoliberal forces. At the heart of the South Africa's economic crisis is the National Treasury, an institution that has systematically failed to use fiscal policy as a developmental instrument to build our economy and transform society. While often praised as competent, the reality is that the National Treasury operates as a protector of neoliberal orthodoxy. advancing the interest of the white capitalist establishment at the expense of our people and our own development. The Treasury refusal to finalize the establishment of state-owned bank, despite clear mandates from Parliament and the former Minister of Finance, reflect their disregard for transformative policies. Similarly, they have deliberately delayed the establishment of a sovereign wealth fund, a critical tool to secure a nation's economic future. This is no accident. This is the result of a revolving door between the National Treasury, private bank, the Reserve Bank, and the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, where officials serve the interest of capital rather than the people. Captured by International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, the National Treasury functions as a satellite office for global financial institutions enforcing austerity measures that cripple public service. Even when officials' contracts come to an end, they are often reappointed through the back door, ensuring continuity of neoliberal policies. It is this captured treasury that has resisted every attempt to expand the state-led industrialization, undermined public investment, and reinforced a broken economic model. It was the same National Treasury, together with the late former Minister of Public Enterprise, who wanted to sell South African Airways for 53 rand. First, they sabotaged it, allowed it to collapse, and come with their group of friends to loot the public asset. It was the EFF that fought tooth and nail at all times for SAA to remain a state-owned company. Today, SAA is reporting profit. We must dismantle this structure and reclaim the treasury for the people, transforming it into a tool for radical economic transformation and development. I must drink water. Cheers. Comrades, our intention is to form a progressive government with the current balance of forces. Comrades, our intention is to form a progressive government within the current balance of forces. We want to be part of the political arrangement of national and provincial levels that will prioritize resolving the land question. The return of the land to its rightful owners is not just a political or economic necessity, it is a moral imperative. Without the land, there can be no true liberation. We want a progressive government that will prioritize the transfer of wealth to the majority of the people and eliminate racialized inequality. A progressive government must actively dismantle the entrenched structure of white monopoly capital that continue to deprive our people of their rightful share in the economy. We want a progressive government that will champion state-led industrialization to revitalize industries in Mokgwase Northwest, Putadichaba and Botshabelo in Free State, Seshiwe and Shayandima in Limpopo, and all industrial sites in the old Transkei and Ciskei that were abandoned by the post-apartheid government. These industrial zones must once again become the hubs of economic activity, employing thousands of workers, producing goods that will reduce our reliance on imports. Through state-led industrialization, we will bring jobs and hope to more than 12 million unemployed people, pushed to the periphery of the society to life of crime, violence, and substance. We want a progressive government that will deliver free, quality, and decolonized higher education, ensuring that every young person in South Africa, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to develop their skills and contribute to the economy. Education is not a privilege, it is a right. And through education, we will arm our youth with the tools to break the circle of poverty. We want a progressive government that will prioritize quality health care for all, with a focus on primary and preventative health care. Our people deserve a health care system that is well-resourced, accessible, and free from inequalities created by privatization. We want a progressive government that will deliver housing for all, repairing and upgrading water and sanitation infrastructure, and cleaning our cities and towns to restore the dignity of black people. It is unacceptable that millions of our black people still live in squalor without access to basic services. A progressive government must declare war on poverty and underdevelopment, ensuring that every South African has a roof over their head and clean drinkable water in their homes. We want to reclaim the state for progressive change to fight racist and colonial economic structure and defeat the neoliberal forces that have captured the state to serve private interests. We reject the idea that the public goods and services should be commodified and sold to the highest bidder. The state must serve the people, not profit. Comrades, a progressive government must also confront the scourge of poverty that continues to plague our society. South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world, and this inequality is not accidental, it is systematic. More than 8 million of our people live below the poverty line, unable to meet their basic needs. A progressive government must create jobs and opportunity for millions of unemployed people who have been excluded from the economy. Through state-led industrialization, infrastructure, development and investment in key sectors such as agriculture, mining, manufacturing and renewable energy, we can put our people back to work and create inclusive economy. Comrades, the progressive government we envision is one that will fundamentally change the structure of the South African economy, shifting it from extractive practices towards sustainable development that benefits the many, not the few. We will use the wealth of our land, our minerals, our soil, our industries to uplift our people, not enrich white capitalist establishment rooted in racism and colonial economic structure. We want a progressive government that owns and controls electricity generation, ensuring that power is cheap, dependable, and accessible to all. Electricity is the lifeblood of economic activity, and no nation can claim sovereignty while relying on private companies or foreign entities for such a critical resource. A progressive government must reclaim control over railway lanes, ports, and harbors to ensure that the movements of goods and people serve national interests and not the profits of the monopolies. The telecommunication infrastructure must also be owned and controlled by the state, providing affordable and reliable connectivity to every South African, from the most remote rural area to urban centers, as a basic necessity for participation in the modern economy. We need a progressive government that will build bullet speed trains from Johannesburg to Musina, from Johannesburg to Durban, from Johannesburg to Cape Town, to reduce the carnage on our roads. We need a progressive government that will invest in building robust defense capabilities, not for imperialist adventurers, but for human development, disaster response, and the protection of the national economic security. A state that cannot defend itself, its resources, or its critical infrastructure is a state at the mercy of Western imperialist powers, even on principle matters. We must explore the build, operate, and transfer model for large and agent infrastructure. We must finance all our infrastructure and partner with countries and private companies that have capacity to bring their skills and operating experience to build large-scale infrastructure, water, rail, roads, and energy infrastructure. We can collaborate with Russia to build a nuclear power station. We can collaborate with India to build telecommunication infrastructure. We must collaborate with China to build large roads and railway lanes, bullet trains, and rebuild our defense capabilities. These are our partners and allies, and we must partner with them. And we must limit this to a short period of operation and manage to short period of 20 to 30 years. Fellow fighters, we believe that there is a possibility that together with the progressive forces, we can still achieve a progressive government. Comrades, one of our major challenges we still face is that since we exist as an enemy of capitalist establishment, we remain confronted with reluctance to fund us for fear of victimization. This situation is made worse by the advent of the political party funding, which requires those who donate to political parties above a particular threshold to be declared publicly. In a context where you can be denied opportunity by the ruling elites based on your political association, the EFF as an anti-capitalist movement continue to face challenges with funding. This, however, should reaffirm all of us, comrades, that we are indeed a reliable vehicle of anti-imperialist and for the democratization of our economy, because the enemy has for so long tried to undermine us by denying us funding by any means necessary. The EFF has over the past 5 years thrived through these conditions and managed to sustain its own offices, its own staff, and its own programs, including outreach initiatives such as pilot programs, building boreholes, and homes for the needy in the face of an onslaught from capital. We must, however, in this assembly, make a meaningful reflection on how we intend to finance the revolution up until the branch level. A leader, whether in central command or branch command team, must be an all-rounder, and part of being an all-rounder means you must have the ability to fundraise. To fundraise does not mean you must be corrupt, but you must selflessly identify those who are aligned with the EFF in society and urge them to fund the revolution. And you must never use the name of the EFF to fundraise for your own personal gain. For utmost important is establishing a sustainable financing model for the EFF and this assembly in a manner that will not compromise integrity and image of the EFF. We will therefore be paying closer attention to this resolution of the Commission, which will be dealing with financing the revolution. Delegates, people of South Africa, the EFF has existed with a love-hate relationship with these people on my left for the past 11 years, the media. And this has not changed. But we must express, what we must express is that we've maintained a healthy relationship with the media and been critical when it is necessary. It is an accepted ideological and political fact that certain interests within the capitalist establishment own and control the media and exist to undermine progressive organization and the ideas which the EFF represent. The past 5 years, especially in the lead up to the elections, we witnessed how the media began to interact with the ideas of the EFF in a negative manner. The establishment moved away from targeting individuals and smear campaigns in the EFF and fought the EFF directly by trying to discredit the ideas we represent. Comrades, it is therefore became important that we as the EFF and as a revolutionary movement, establish our own propaganda machinery. Media spaces become saturated with bias, and the media space in general develops while traditional media houses dwindle into insignificance. The EFF has managed this terrain very well. There is no political party that can be compared to the EFF when it comes to its running of publicity, its own publicity. And many of those who have made it their mission to fight us have been so focused on the EFF that the media space has left them behind. A digital media is orchestrating the collapse of traditional media platforms such as newspapers and broadcast television. Comrade delegates, the city press, which said the EFF is going to die, is itself dying tomorrow. Tomorrow they will be publishing their last newspaper when the EFF will be growing bigger and better. It is the biasness and capture of the traditional media platforms that has led to consumers progressively ditching newspapers, formats, and television news outlets for new forms of media such as podcasting, streaming, digital means of consuming the news such as social media, where the truth is spoken unfiltered. The EFF must continue to keep up with media trends and avoid dying along with traditional media platforms because of their legacy or their brands. As a movement of the future, we must begin to develop and craft discourse in an innovative manner and not die with the fossils who control traditional media platforms. In the past elections, we have witnessed how aggressive the media was and how it was complicit in finishing the EFF and its leadership. These elections were a clear demonstration of the capture of the mainstream media, and as a result, we must intensify our internal communications machinery, and each and every one of us bear the responsibility of defending the movement both in private, in public, and particularly on social media from all enemy forces. Fighters, the tectonic plates of the global balance of forces are shifting. The escalation and aggression we see today from the United States and its Western allies against the Russian Federation has reached levels where we have not seen the defeat of the Axis powers, which were led by Nazi Germany during the Second World War. After benefiting from the help of the Soviet Union to defeat fascist regime in Europe, the United States of America developed the Truman Doctrine to pledge financial, military, political support to government regimes which align with the fight of America against communism. What we see in Ukraine today is nothing but a continuation of the American attempt through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO forces, to consolidate the global territories against Russia and instill a unipolar global West hegemony. We stand with Russia and President Putin in his fight for a multipolar world against NATO. Ukraine is too small a country for us to believe that it is in a war with Russia. This is not a Russian-Ukraine war. This is an American NATO war against Russia and her sovereignty. Fighters, we must once again express our appreciation of Cuba, which continues to stand as a revolutionary force in the world. It is the left-oriented government of Cuba which led the anti-imperialist agenda in Latin America and the establishment of government with socialist principles. It is Cuba that stood with us during the dark days of apartheid, and we dare not forget. The global media establishment will not tell you that in Cuba there is a free health care which has resulted in higher life expectancy than America. Cuba continues to produce the best doctors and health practitioners to the point of sending them to other countries to aid them, including the United States. Cuba is able to achieve this because it has the highest doctor-to-resident ratio in the world. In Cuba, more than 10% of the budget is spent on education, resulting in their high literacy rate and small class sizes in primary and secondary education, giving their teachers an opportunity to give special focus to all learners. Lastly, the United Nations ranks Cuba in the top 49 on the Index of Democracy, Equity, and Development. We salute the progressive leaders of Sahel region. The struggle against the colonial powers, in particular France, waged by Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, affirms their undying resistance against neocolonialism and imperialism. Their resolve to defend their nation's sovereignty and dignity by any means necessary is an example of a true left and progressive leadership in the region. They have expelled French companies, diplomatic representation, and military operations. Fighters, we welcome the International Criminal Court's decision to issue arrest warrant against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Minister Gallant. The two are responsible for crimes against humanity committed against the Palestinian people in Gaza Strip, using starvation as a form of warfare, murder, persecution, the intentional targeting of civilian population, and genocide. South Africa, as a signatory to the Roman Statutes and participant in International Criminal Court, has a legal obligation to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu without bias. We will not stop standing with the people of Palestine against the tyranny of the genocidal Zionist state of Israel. We reaffirm our commitment to human rights and self-determination of the people of Palestine and Sahrawi Republic. Fighters, on 1st December 2024, South Africa assumed the presidency of Group of 20 under the theme Solidarity, Equality, and Sustainability. The G20 is an intergovernmental economic forum comprising 19 countries and 2 regional unions, the European Union and African Union. G20 countries account for almost 2/3 of the global population. Over 85% of the world's gross domestic product, GDP, and over 75% of global trade. Over the years, the G20 has been a global stage and a platform to consolidate major global economic issues, sustainable development, health, energy, trade, and other geopolitical topics. Since its establishment, no single African country has presided over the forum. Therefore, this presents a good opportunity for Africa to rise to the occasion and stop reducing herself into an inactive, powerless bystander of geopolitics. South Africa, having assumed the presidency of G20, must lead the discussion to reposition Africa as an equal player on the world stage. When South Africa hosts the G20 summit next year, it must be hosted here in NASREC so that it may be accessible to local businesses and the township economy. Taking this forum to Cape Town will be filled opportunity to empower our local economies, as the spatial planning of Cape Town relegates our people to the outskirts of economic activity and far from business districts. As an integral member of BRICS, South Africa must uphold diplomatic immunity for our Russian ally, President Putin, when he attends the summit next year. What we saw during BRICS Summit was nothing short of global humiliation and exposed the South African government as a spineless global player who cannot protect its allies against imperialist aggression. Fighters, we must never abandon the struggle to support the people of Western Sahara against the colonial occupation perpetuated by Morocco. And one of the struggles we must champion is breaking the hold that Morocco has over the sporting world in the continent. We must isolate Morocco, not only diplomatically, but even in the sports, academically, and otherwise, until the people of Western Sahara are released from the chains of apartheid in Morocco. Comrades, we owe our African sister nations through solidarity. This means that we must strengthen institutions that ought to protect African sovereignty and democratic institutions. The Pan-African Parliament, the African Union must be brave institutions with teeth to protect the continent from Western interferences. We must never have a repeat of the betrayal suffered by brother leader Muammar Gaddafi, where he was surrendered to NATO forces by the former state president of South Africa and other African nations. We must speak unity of purpose, and that unity requires strong African institutions such as a standalone military army, a powerful Pan-African parliament, and a Pan-African court, and ultimately one unitary African currency and one African president. Fellow fighters, we must observe keenly the political changes in the SADC region, where former liberation movements are all being defeated by popular opposition parties, which are characterized by young people. We are very proud of the UDC government in Botswana because it's constituted in the main by relatively young people, bringing to an end a more than 50 years rule of the so-called former liberation movement. The wave of the defeat of the former liberation movement is a sign that our people are breaking away from the past. And this is not only in Botswana and Zambia, but even here in South Africa, the former liberation movement has been defeated and holds onto power due to its alliance with white supremacists. In Zimbabwe, the ruling party holds onto power through state-sponsored violence, intimidation, and suppression of the democratic will of the people of Zimbabwe. One day, Zimbabwe will also know the true freedom, and the children of Zimbabwe will live happily. We must begin to be alive to the possibility that Africa is changing, and the direction of our region and continent will now be determined by politics of youth and the future. As the politics of old are dying, the EFF must begin to position itself as a force within SADC region and draws lessons from our counterparts on how not only to defeat liberation movement, but ultimately usurp power and govern. I'm with you. Fellow fighters, the EFF remains the only liberation movement on the continent that is determined to build African unity. It was President Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana who once said, "The core of the black revolution is in Africa, and until Africa is united under a socialist government, the black men and women throughout the world lacks a national home." It is for this reason, fighters, that we must fight jealously for the independence of Africa and the independence reliance on the use of Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is our scientific response to the Western world, which has turned Africa into a place for cheap, exploitable labor and the theft of our resources. It is the conscious decision that we need to unite as African people and defend Africa and her people from being the slave side of the world, towards continental unity that is defined by economic, political, cultural, and social cooperation. It is a battle we have inherited from the slaves who were stolen on our shores and made to build the economies of our white colonial counterparts. Fellow comrades, we must never tire of pursuing the principle that Africa must unite from Cape to Cairo, from Morocco to Madagascar. We only have each other because everywhere in the world the black child is hated. We must unite because it is our unity that will place us at the center of the global economy. Not spectators, but as participants whose people meaningfully benefit from the wealth of our land. We are not fighting to be slaves of capital. We are fighting for self-determination. We are the Pan-Africanist of Robert Sobukwe, and our journey must be to give Africa a more humane face. For too long, we have been made to hate each other because of our culture or our religious differences. For too long, we have been made to feel inferior. For too long, we have fought tribal and ethnic wars amongst ourselves. And for too long, our continent has bled while our colonizers benefited. Let us adopt the Pan-Africanist of Thomas Sankara and work our own land while we refuse to pay colonial tax. Let us live by the Pan-Africanist of Julius Nyerere and build a nation that is self-reliant and works together as a collective for the greater good of the Mother Africa. Let us walk side by side and be the Pan-Africanist of Robert Sobukwe and be arrogant in the need for African unity and undermine imperialism wherever it raises its ugly heads. It is Pan-Africanism which will liberate us and liberate the whole of Africa. We have suffered too much for our blood. We have suffered too much. Our blood has turned the soil of Africa red. It is time for us to resist this pain and give Africa a future of happiness. Let us march together as Africa. Let us march together towards the liberation of our victory. Whether they hate us for this policy or not, we must fight for the unity of the African people. In conclusion, finally, I would like to thank all commissars who are here today and have committed their time and resources towards this organization. It was at this very venue 5 years ago, during closing address of our Second National People's Assembly, that we asked each and every one of you to go and tell your families that for the next 5 years, you will be servant of the revolution and will not always be available. All of you in your majority must, after this National People's Assembly, go home and report that you are a trusted soldier of the revolution who, even when it seemed like our movement was faced with death did not waver. You did not betray the organization, the only dependable and trusted weapon in the hands of the poor and the working class. I pray that the revolution remembers each one of you, regardless of the outcome of this assembly on the election of the leadership. Commissars, you must all know that our ancestors who started this organization are extremely proud of you. Fellow fighters, I want to thank all the officials of the EFF, the National Chairperson and the DSG. And I want to extend a special thanks to Secretary General Commissar Marshal Dlamini, who steered the ship when it was difficult to do so. Secretary General of the EFF, is a firm comrade at all times, operates within the maximum discipline and commitment in a very militant way because of his extreme loyalty to the organization and the liberation of our people. Many have tried to doubt him and cast doubt on his capabilities. But I want to say here today, unashamedly, that in our Secretary General, we have a loyal and dependable soldier of the revolution. On behalf of all members of the movement, we want to thank you, SG, for being a man who finishes what he started with conviction. Even though you started politics here in the EFF, you are one of the most reliable comrades I've encountered in my long political career. You focus on the task at hand without seeking any glory. You are not attention seeker, and we have come to know you for paying attention to a finer detail. I salute you for remaining strong in the face of criticism and after difficult elections outcome. Under your administration, our movement has grown and you have not disappointed us. You have served us with dignity and humility and are one of the best amongst us. We thank you. Comrade delegates, I also want to thank the Treasurer General, Commissar Umphile Maotwe, who has looked after the finances of the organization even when there was not much to work with and the white capitalist establishment was pouring billions into neoliberal forces and political startups. The EFF is not a movement that receives massive financial support, and even with that reality, you made sure that no event or programs of the EFF, whether it is social outreach or rallies, has ever failed because of resources. Equally, under the leadership of the Treasurer General, the EFF has never gone a month without paying staff members of the EFF. At the backbone which makes this organization what it is. They seek no praise, yet ensure our organization operates effectively on the day-to-day basis, from security guards, cleaners, researchers, and administrators. Together with a team, they've also paid for regional offices of the EFF, sustained and accounted for all assets without fail. She has also put the organization before any relationship or friendship and has played a role to ensure that there is no wasteful expenditure of the limited resources that we have. I want to thank the EFF staff members who were unsure whether they will wake up with their jobs after the EFF did not perform to our expectations in the previous elections. As a result, they understood the difficult measures had to be implemented to manage the decrease in money allocation that comes with a marginal electoral deadline. Many of our staff members were not sure if they will remain employed once there was an attempt on the life of their organization and its leadership. Yet even with that doubt and opportunities for better paying jobs, they remained loyal and continued to serve their organization. To the ground forces, leaders of the regions and provinces who are always on the receiving end of the consequences of our political decisions and pronouncements, even when they know nothing about them, but trust in the democratic processes. Your revolutionary discipline is what keeps and safeguards our movement from opportunists and revisionists driven by egos and uncontrollable ambition. It is because our regional leaders and provincial leaders took a constitutional oath to defend the EFF in private and in public that our members and structures were able to close ranks and ensure when we were under attack, our organization should remain solid. Provincial General Assemblies, which were all successful, had no incident of disruption or violence, proved to us that you have built a solid and dependable structures in your regions and provinces. Those who predict the death of the EFF will always be disappointed because the EFF has strong collective leadership at all levels. We thank everyone who prayed for us during our election campaigns, events, and private spaces when it seemed like our movement was collapsing. Your prayers have given us strength and continue to do so. I want to thank the pastors who prayed for this organization. Through their prayers, we have remained stable and faithful to the cause of liberation. We survived without knowing where these prayers came from, and we do not take this for granted. It is not always easy to associate with a radical movement, but you remind us of the role of faith in the struggle for freedom. We also thank the traditional leaders who counseled us, took their time to listen to the leadership, opened their homes, and allowed us to campaign in their constituencies. To the protectors who risked their lives during campaigns and exhibited loyalty during times of difficulty, you have our gratitude. It is through your sacrifice and professionalism that we have remained strong. One of those protectors is called Sbungowo, who has been with the EFF since it was formed till to date, loyal to protect and serve the leadership of our movement. We want to thank the defenders of the revolution, our internal defense mechanism against sabotage and threat to the programs of the movement. The DOR is an essential part of our movement and must continue to grow from strength to strength with potential to be professionalized. We also extend our gratitude to the security companies who ensure the success of our events and provide important services in addition to our own security capacity. We appreciate all the service providers who have been patient with us, including those who have been paid and those who are still awaiting payment. We thank them for their understanding of our internal financial systems and the objective reality that at times we rely on institutions to finance us, which can cause delays in fulfilling our responsibility. We appreciate you and we value your patience. We thank the external staff members and management who participated in the delivery of this third National People's Assembly, especially the JOC, Joint Operations Center team, and the management of NASREC for their kindness and patience. We also extend our gratitude to the business people who have stood with us, particularly the young entrepreneurs who have contributed the little they have to support our movement and its program. It is not always easy to remain aligned with us, especially in the face of internal challenges and external attacks on the EFF. Public perception always dictates how people choose to support institutions. Yet, despite this, these business people have continued to support our organization, even when facing the risk of being sidelined or targeted. We commend their contribution, even as they've declined in recent times due to challenges we have faced. Support for the EFF from the business sector has diminished because many of those who initially supported us were opportunistic and possibly corrupt. They thought they could gain something in return. However, those who supported us with genuine intent remain with us today. They have continued to contribute the little they have to help us succeed. To those who continue to make contributions are under no obligation to contribute to the EFF, yet they take the risk. We deeply appreciate their contribution. over the years, they can clearly see where their money goes, because no organization can match us in honesty and delivering on what we commit to do. We wish them more success and pray that their efforts are rewarded. Wherever their resources come from, we hope they are blessed with even greater prosperity for their personal and business growth. Fighters, on a personal note, I would like to thank my late grandmother, who remains my guiding engine. Even in moments where it feels difficult, it feels giving up and surrender due to lacks and difficulty that comes with being attacked from within. It is my grandmother's guiding wisdom that kept me going. She is the one who named me a soldier. And as a result, I've become a soldier of the people. Her solid courage motivates me to remain committed to this movement and to the struggle for economic freedom in our lifetime. I honor her memory and strive never to disappoint her, even as she watches over me from heaven. For this reason, I will never abandon this movement. She entrusted me with the role of being a father figure and a parent to the destitute and forgotten masses of our people. I extend my appreciation to my family, my children, and all my extended family and friends who suffered the consequences of my activism. They experience the same pressure as I do due to our actions as an organization, yet they've stood behind me without fail. Their firm support is a testament to me that it is possible for black people to build strong families and place love at the center of their lives. I love them, and most importantly, thank them for their patience with me and for their role in this revolution. Special thanks to my wife, who has tolerated my nonsense for the past 10 years, as we'll be celebrating our 10th anniversary on the 27th of December. I also extend my gratitude to you, the delegates of the branches who are present here today. Since my youth, there's been unrelenting efforts to demoralize and discourage me, to tire me, and force me to concede defeat to the establishment. However, the faith you have placed in me, like you have done with many commissars and leaders of our revolution, keeps me going. They will never succeed because I will never sacrifice my life for anyone other than the EFF and the revolution. We will not be bought or swayed, for we owe our life to all of you. We owe our lives to this revolution. The highest honor you can bestow upon me is to have my coffin wrapped in the red flag of the EFF. Such an act will signify that I've been loyal servant of our people and did not betray the revolution. Loyalty and disciplined membership of the EFF will ensure, when the time comes, that we are honored as revolutionaries. You will bid us farewell by bearing us with the red flag, which you will hand over to our families when we join the other fallen heroes in eternal rest. We are grateful that you have elected us. We do not feel entitled to these positions, but are humbled by the opportunity to serve. We are always available to serve in any assigned role. We are not the best amongst the best, but we are loyal to you and your freedom. We have been chosen for this task, and we have tried to fulfill it to the best of our ability. We thank you and wish you a productive National People's Assembly. Comrades, with the powers vested in me as a democratically elected president and the commander-in-chief by the Second National People's Assembly, I declare this assembly open. I end on this note with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. I quote, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." Thank you.
I'm a king, yes, I'm a king, I think I'm a king,